What's going on? What's going on? Thank you for joining me in this episode of The Gospel Truth. I'm your host, Martin Wilson, and we have another great for you today. Another debate. As you know, we are going to do a great one today. Are supernatural claims irrational? That's the topic that's going to be debated today. I just want to thank you. And with that, I do want to go ahead and encourage you to like and follow The Gospel Truth, not only on Facebook, but also on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Make sure you're hitting it. Make sure you hit that notification bell. And if you're watching this on Facebook, hit that like and that follow. And hit that notification bell as well to make sure you are in the loop with what the Gospel Truth has going on. As you know, we're engaged in the culture of Christian truth, and we do that through debates, interviews, and Bible lessons. So with that, I want to thank you for joining me, and I pray that you are helping and assisting. And one way you can assist is, once again, subscribe. I can't say that enough. So make sure that you are jumping on and doing your thing, all right? That said, let me go over a couple of announcements before I bring these guys in. I can find it. Let me see. All right, coming up tomorrow, that time has changed. That's going to be actually 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to have this debate. It's going to be, is Christianity a religion of bloody oppression? That's coming up with, tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sorry, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure you stay in the loop for that one. After that, I have a 2-on-2 debate. Is regeneration needed before one can come to Christ? That's coming up. It's going to be a great one. That's coming up October 23rd at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. After that, I have a big one coming up. Sam Shimon versus Matt Slick. Is limited atonement biblical? That's coming up October 24th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. This is going to be a great debate, man. Highly anticipated debate. So make sure you are up on par on this one as well. After that, I have August 26th, I have George Alvarado versus Matt Singleton. Was Jesus eternally or incarnationally the Son of God? That's coming up August 26th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That is the next 4 shows coming up on here on The Gospel Truth. Make sure that you are subscribing. Make sure you are liking. Make sure you're doing your thing in order to stay in the loop with what The Gospel Truth has going on. As I said before, I already mentioned the YouTube and Facebook page, but everything is on podcast as well. So make sure that you are subscribing on a podcast to make sure that we have a good rating on there, and make sure you are in the loop. All right. That said, let me bring in Michael and Jeff G so they can introduce themselves. What's up, guys? How's it going?
Yo, what's going on?
What's up with you,
It's
Jeff?
going
man?
pretty
How's
well,
everything?
thanks.
Going good.
Oh,
Going good.
about as good as it can be. Yeah, healthy, happy, you know.
Yeah, I hear you, man. So before we jump into this, man, I'm gonna give you a chance to introduce yourself to the audience. Starting with Michael, man. Give a quick introduction yourself.
Hey, how y'all doing? My name is Michael Phiffer. I am 28 years old. Let me see here. I am a husband, a father of 2, and I'm a young man seeking to serve Christ with all of my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and spread the gospel.
All right. Thank you, Michael, for joining me. Mr. Jeff, go ahead and give a quick introduction to yourself, man.
Yeah, for sure. My name's Jeff. I guess you could call me an agnostic atheist, which basically means that I don't necessarily say God isn't real. I just kind of say that the burden of proof hasn't been met yet. Ex-Christian. Don't really have any problems with the religion or anything. I just don't necessarily believe in it anymore. And I like having these conversations because I don't really get to have conversations like this in my just average everyday daily life. So it's fun. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Once again, thank you guys for joining me on this episode. And today's topic is going to be, are supernatural claims irrational? So we're going to have a good one today. And I expect a real rounded debate. And I'm interested in these arguments. See what kind of arguments there are. This is a very, I say one of the more difficult aspects of debate from a Christian perspective, if you ask me. But we're going to see what we got, man. We'll see what we got. All right. So we're going to start off with a 10-minute opening statement. Then we're going to follow that with a 5-minute rebuttal. Then we're going to have a cross-examination portion. It's going to be a total of 50 minutes. The first 30 minutes will be 15 minutes each of you guys asking each other's questions. And then after that, we're going to follow the last 20 minutes to be more of an open discussion, and where I may have some questions for you guys, and we'll tackle those questions. And that's going to follow by a 5-minute closing. And then we're going to have Q&A from the audience. Sounds good?
Sounds good.
All right. Mr. Michael, You are, let me see, are they irrational? Nope. That means Jeff G is arguing the affirmative in this debate. So we are going to go with Jeff G first. Let me know when you're ready, Jeff, and I'll set your timer, man.
Yeah, just whenever. I won't take the full timer. I'm going to be pretty quick about it. I got a little visitor here too.
I hear.
Yeah, you just let me know when you're ready and I can go, or I can just start going now.
All right, you got it, man. 10 minutes, man.
All right, cool. Yeah, like I said, it's going to be pretty short. I'm more interested in the back and forth in these. I think that's the more fun part. But yeah, I guess just kind of definitionally, there's a couple different ways you could look at like the term irrational. The way I'm kind of using it is more colloquially, as opposed to like, for instance, you could have. She's annoying me. You could have a belief that is rational but not justified, or you could have a belief that's justified but not rational. For instance, if somebody can't swim, then it is probably justified for them to be afraid of going into a swimming pool. However, if that person is afraid of going into the swimming pool because they think there's piranhas in it, well, then it's not a rational fear. It's even though it is quote unquote justified. And you can kind of turn that around as well. Like, for instance, one of the most convincing one of the most convincing, I guess, turns of events that people seem to have or experience, it would be like the revelation from God. There seem to be a lot of people that have this experience themselves. To which I would say that, you know, if you legitimately believe that you have been revealed by God to of His existence, then yeah, that belief would be quote unquote rational, but it wouldn't be justified, meaning that there's no actual like evidence that what you experienced was what you thought you experienced. Whenever we're talking to rationality in this case, I'm kind of I think it's, if you just want to say, is it rational if people have experiences like that to believe it, then I would say, sure, it's rational, but it's not justified. So I'm kind of saying that it's supernatural beliefs, at least to this point, tend to be neither justified nor rational. So I guess in the more colloquial sense, I'm kind of using the term irrational. And again, it kind of depends on the claim as well. You know, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Evidence is proportional to the claim, so it would be what it is. But as far as I can tell, there has never been an instance of something that is supernatural to have ever been examined or to have ever been presented. So I don't even really know like what we can say is the supernatural if we've never experienced it. So basically, my whole argument here is that no supernatural claim has ever met its burden of proof that I can tell. Maybe you have some that have, then you can educate me. I'd love to learn. But yeah, the basically it all comes down to, usually there is an explanation for something, and if there's not an explanation for something, it's irrational to just jump to a supernatural cause for something. We've had plenty of examples of things in the past that we thought were supernatural, like lightning, until we figured out, oh, they have a scientific cause. So until we can show the supernatural to even exist in the first place, it's a huge leap of logic to just like jump to that conclusion. So yeah, that's probably the most of it. I generally don't think anybody's ever been able to actually show evidence of the supernatural. It seems to be a pretty big logical leap, and if you don't have a justification or reasonableness for the claim in the first place, then it seems to me to be an irrational belief. So yeah, that's my general premise, and I'm sure that we'll dive into that more in the back and forth. So anything that I left out there or may have misspoken, I hope that you're able to call me out so that we could dive a little deeper into that.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff, for that opening. All right, Mike, you're up for your 10-minute open, man. And you got it, man.
Sounds good. Hey, first of all, I want to thank you, Jeff, for going ahead and agreeing to participate in this debate. Marlon, want to thank you for inviting me on once again. Appreciate it, man. Just for the opportunity to engage. I love engaging in opportunities like these to be able to, gather around or just think with other people who don't necessarily think like me. I prefer to be around people that don't think like me. So this is an awesome opportunity. Um, so I want to get into the meat of what we're trying to get into here is whether or not supernatural claims are irrational, right? And so, what do we mean by supernatural, right? So, one way of describing what we mean by supernatural so is we live in a natural world, right? That is, our world is functioning by natural laws, right? Laws of gravity and things like this. Just different laws, right? And so, when we experience or examine a thing that is counter to what we normally see on a regular day basis, then or something that is uh, something that is outside of the regularities that we examine within the laws of nature. We can deposit, hold on, because we know that things normally or regularly go like this is an irregularity. I'm curious as to what's going on here. And what you can examine is by implying in a philosophical inference by examining the cases, you may be able to postulate, if you use proper reasoning and logic, that you have a supernatural phenomenon going on rather than just a natural phenomenon. So I agree with Jeff that in the past, a lot of maybe a religion saw thunder or lightning and things like that in the sky, and they posited a supernatural explanation where they may not have had justified reason to posit a superficial, or I'm sorry, a supernatural justification. Where you're correct, you speak correctly, or he speaks correctly, as in to where we begin to study it with science, and we come to find out thousands of years later, or hundreds of years later, no, this is just the natural outworking of the laws of physics or the laws of nature. So when we experience or examine an irregularity, we can posit with proper logic that this is probably something that's outside of our natural laws. So so for example, there are actually millions and millions of testimonies of people that have experienced either something that's supernatural or miracles and things like that. And I'll just go over a few of them and let's examine them. So, for example, there was a survey that asked if people had claimed or over 38% of people here in America claim that they have experienced something that can only have been explained by God. Right now, if you extrapolate that out, that's over 94 million. Let me see. Yeah, that's over 94 million miracles just here in the U.S. Okay, now, even if you reduce 99% of those, that's 1 million. Okay. Now, granted, a lot of those could have been coincidence. I'll grant that. I'll grant that a lot of people fake things. I'll grant that, right? But even if you reduce 99% of them, that's a million. And the problem is that if we're going to say that not only just those million, but the millions and millions and millions throughout all of history had to have been wrong, what's the probability of that, right? What's the probability of all these millions of claims being made throughout history being wrong, right? Now you can examine them, right? And as you'll see, I'll give more examples, okay? So, for example, let's start with there's a lady named Barbara Schneider. Back in 1981, actually, the Chicago Tribune actually documented this miracle. So, Barbara Schneider, she was a woman who had multiple sclerosis. So she had a tube in her throat, she couldn't breathe. She had a tube in her stomach, couldn't eat. She lost control of her bowels, her sight, and she could only see shapes at this point. One of her lungs had collapsed, and the other had partially collapsed. She had experienced atrophy in her legs, so she couldn't even walk. She was bedridden. Two doctors had kept examining her and come to find out, hey, yeah, she's on her deathbed. She's not going to make it. What ended up happening is over the radio, her sisters went to the radio host and asked that people began to pray for her sister. Well, long story short, over 450 people began to pray for her, and they wrote letters. So her sisters actually came in and were reading the letters to her. And while they were reading the letters to her, Barbara, who was laying in the bed, she heard a voice that said, "Get up, my child, and walk." And she said, after that, she stood up and she realized, hold on, my hands, her fingers were curled all the way back to her wrists. Her feet, which had atrophied to the point to where she couldn't walk, she hadn't walked in 7 years. She was standing flat on her feet. Then she realized, I can see. So her sight had come back to her. Okay. Then if you go back, I got another one. I'm losing time. I'll go to another one. If you want to question me on some of these, that's fine. I got the details. Dwayne Miller. Dwayne Miller is a pastor who experienced a virus in his throat, in his vocal cords, that destroyed his nerves, paralyzed his voice to where he couldn't speak for 3 years. He ended up, and very long story short, he was examined by over 63 physicians, including a Swiss symposium. And voice expert says that the prognosis for his voice was zero. Very long story short, he ended up getting invited to a church to speak, and he was actually preaching out of Psalms 103. Anyone who knows what Psalm 103 is, Psalms 103 is a verse that talks about how God heals us from all of our diseases. Well, when he spoke the word pit, you can actually, and you can look up Barbara's as well. When he spoke the word pit, he said the sensation of like this hand that was around his throat, gripping his throat, had been released. And after such, he went back to the doctor, and the doctor said, I can't see any damage done to your vocal cords. It's as if nothing was wrong with him. And so, and now this guy's pastoring. You can actually hear that miracle. I sent it out to a few people last year. You can actually hear that miracle on a website called nuvoice.org, nuvoice.org. As a matter of fact, if you examine over 55% of physicians here in America have actually said they've seen examples within their practice of medicine that can only be explained by God. And I'll give you one more. There is a professor who is a PhD from Harvard, who is a professor at Indiana University. And her name is Candy Gunther Brown. And she went to Mozambique. And what she did was she heard about all these miracles that were happening in Mozambique. So she took a team of researchers and scientists, and they went out to Mozambique. And what they did was they called out the deaf and they called out the blind. And they scientifically tested them. You can look this up, as a matter of fact. Yeah, it's in the study of therapeutic effect of proximal intercessory prayer. And what they did was they laid hands on them, and they brought along people who had a track record of God using them in healings, and they laid hands on them. They tested them first. For their hearing. One lady, she couldn't hear a jackhammer. As a matter of fact, she couldn't hear a jackhammer going off right next to her. What you end up finding out is that for this lady specifically, after 10 minutes of prayer, when they prayed for her in the name of Jesus, she actually recovered her hearing to where she can hear a normal conversation. So, and you can go examine the study yourself. It's a peer-reviewed medical journal, and so you can examine it yourself. And they went to Brazil and did the same thing. They laid hands on the blind, they laid hands on the deaf, and they recovered their sight. Some of these people couldn't see a hand in front of their face, and then afterwards they were able to see very clearly. So there are all kinds of examples of the supernatural or God intervening into nature and working through His people, and that's my time. So that's all I want to leave that up to you and see. If we can go back and forth.
All right, you actually have 38 seconds left, Mike. That was 38 seconds. That was 1 minute time.
I'm good.
Are you good?
Good.
All right, cool. I'm good. All right, thank you guys for that. Hey, why am I not coming up on that one? Some weird stuff going on right now, man.
It's all good.
That makes sense. All right. Hold on 1 second, guys.
Yeah, you good.
Yeah, for whatever reason, you guys can't hear me, can't see me. My camera's not coming up. But anywho,
we can hear you.
So we're gonna transition. The next portion of this debate will be 5-minute rebuttals. All right. So starting with Jeff, you got 5 minutes to rebut Michael Phiffer.
Yeah, I'll just kind of go down here. Sorry if I'm jumping all over the place, but I'm going to do my best here. So we start off with, I'm trying to go over my notes here. I took quite a few notes. We start off, we live in a natural world that functions under natural laws. I agree. When we experience something that is counter to what we normally see on a regular day basis, these are kind of like vague. I don't really know exactly what you're talking about. You said something that's outside the regularities we examine within the law of nature. I don't really know what you mean. I don't know if you have any examples of these things that we found. The closest thing I can think of is kind of at the quantum level, our understanding of physics breaks down. Like things can be in superpositions, which is basically like multiple positions at once. But I don't really think that's supernatural because we actually have we have explanations for that, and we can make novel testable predictions about those. Like we can say, if according to this wave function that this particle is in, we can guess that 50% of the time it'll appear here, and we can accurately judge that stuff. So there's actually it's not supernatural, it's just different. let's see, when we experience an irregularity, we can posit with proper logic that this is something outside our natural laws. I don't know how you could possibly do that. I don't know how you could experience something and then just kind of tell that it's outside natural laws. Again, if you can like show me examples of how we can do this, then fine. But I don't really know how we can do this in like a scientific method. Like for instance, when I talk about evidence, like what I think is good evidence is basically evidence is just data plus assessment, right? So in order for enough evidence to rise to the level of belief in a proposition, the evidence would have to be repeatable. It would have to be independently verifiable. It would have to be strongly tied to a very distinct hypothesis. So we can't just say like, I think a person will be sick and then be healed. And it should be falsifiable also. And to make a claim like something is from the supernatural doesn't seem falsifiable or to meet any of those criteria. So I don't really know how we can see any of these claims are supernatural. 38% of people say they experience something that can only be explained by God. That is, there's a name for it, but that's a fallacy in itself, saying that you can only be explained by this. There are plenty of other explanations that could potentially explain this away. So if you can't really like prove that one is done by God, then even if you reduce it by 99%, that's still zero. Like 0 times 94 million people claiming is still 0. If it's not, I mean, these claims aren't testable or verifiable. And we talked about like probabilities, like what's the probabilities they're wrong. I would say that it's infinitely more possible that all these people are incorrect about what is happening to them, rather than a supernatural that we have no evidence of and that we can provide no examples of is the cause for it. Especially when these people have been raised in like a situation where they're told that the supernatural, exists and that it intersects with their reality. It makes a lot of sense that these people would say that that's their only explanation. Then we have people, I guess, that got healed. Again, unless we have like some medical records that kind of show that all this happened, I don't really have much to say. One sec, sorry. Hey, stop. I don't really, there's nothing I can really say about that other than unless you can like show to me that this was a miracle. I don't really know what to say. We talked about intercessory prayer. The Heritage Foundation did a study on intercessory prayer that shows that it is effective in the same way as chants. I think I found that study that you were talking about, study of therapeutic effects of intercessory prayer, which says in the abstract that patients who received complications occurred in 52% of patients who received intercessory prayer versus 51% who did not. There seems to be some, according to, I think, this article and a couple other ones I've seen, the only real like therapeutic, there is some effectiveness to prayer, potentially, but that's more of like knowing that people are around you and being surrounded by people. Being in a good mood and being in like a good place to fight a disease is good for you and can be helpful. But we actually see in these studies that intercessory prayer can actually has lower than odds, basically lower than 50% chance of helping people. And a lot of times, a lot of people that have studied this kind of chalk that up to performance anxiety. Like they know people are there, so they kind of get nervous. I know I'm reducing that and simplifying that very much, but that's the general idea. I don't know. You have some examples of people who apparently got miraculously healed, but like I can't, unless I can see like some of the medical journals or some of the studies that were done on them, or unless we can take something that we learned from these and then either test that and apply that to different people, or unless we can falsify it. So if you're just saying that it's God, there's really no way to falsify these. So like we can argue about these, but there's nothing that I can really say because I don't know anything about these studies. And if we don't have any like documentation about it, I can just say that there has never been in the medical field any like documentation of miraculous healing happening that we don't have some sort of explanation for. That's very hyperbolic. There probably is some stuff in the medical field that we don't have explanation for. But generally, we don't just leap to saying that it's supernatural or like a god did it. Basically, it's the idea that the simplest solution is usually the best. And if something crazy happens that we don't have a solution for, that doesn't mean that we couldn't possibly find one, much like the lightning. We didn't have a solution for it before. We didn't know what caused it. We learned a lot, and now we do know what caused it. I guess basically just, I don't think anything here was actually like evidence of or examples of the supernatural. It's just kind of a lot of people believe in the supernatural, but appeal to the masses doesn't really prove anything is true. And I'm also curious when it comes to prayer, like, are these studies, like, are these all Christians? I mean, because there are other religions that can also say that there's people that have prayed to Krishna or prayed to Allah or prayed to, whoever, and that they've been healed by their God as well. It seems to me that this is probably a phenomenon that is just probably contained within religious communities. And Well, not necessarily. Actually, I take that back as well. There's probably agnostic or non-theistic ways to have like, I guess, some miracles or whatnot. But again, I don't really know if any of those are actual evidence. They just seem to be kind of anecdotal stories that people are like, hey, we were sick and now I'm not, and I can't really prove it. Yeah, that's about it.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. All right, Mike, you got it, man, for a 5-minute rebuttal.
So I want to start on something about the, whether or not these people were from a Christian background or not. If I'm understanding that objection properly, it sounds like a genetic fallacy to me. For those of you who are not aware of what a genetic fallacy is, a genetic fallacy is trying to postulate that how a person came to believe something or how a person came to experience a thing is false based on how they came to experience it, right? Or how they came to believe it, how they came to know it. And that is irrelevant. For example, it's like saying, hey, you're only a Christian because you grew up in America. Well, Christianity is very prevalent in America, and the probability of you being raised in a Christian born home is extremely high. Therefore, had you been born in Iraq, you probably would have been born, a Muslim. That's true, but it's irrelevant for whether or not my claim is true, right? So it's really irrelevant whether or not it was strictly within the confines of a Christian believing atmosphere. Now, the examples that I gave can all be they're all very well documented. I just didn't have a lot of time. Barbara Snyder, both of the doctors who were working on her. As a matter of fact, when the doctor saw her, he thought it was an apparition. He thought it was a ghost because he had written her off as dead. We're talking about medical doctors that had both of them wrote books on this whole situation. So it's very well documented. You have her medical records, which are accessible, that you can get, and so which are a part of the Chicago Tribune. Every example that I've given, I try to find examples where there is compiled data. So like Craig Keener has like a 2-volume series on very well documented miracles or very well documented supernatural claims. And so it's not just, oh, well, I had a cough and my cough went away, or, I had the cold and somebody prayed over me and, and I've already had it for a week and a half and then somebody prayed for me and it went away. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, like, for example, Barbara Snyder. This woman was on her deathbed. The woman could not breathe on her own. She couldn't eat on her own. She had atrophy in her leg. She hadn't walked in 7 years. And um, this was not, spontaneous remission where it was slowly coming back. Normally, with spontaneous remission, it is a thing that actually you're starting. A lot of times people don't know. Like sometimes, like a person who's like a paraplegic, actually they had strength in their legs enough to sort of walk, but they just didn't know it because they hadn't tried in so long. And a lot of times people actually revert back to being a cripple or revert back to their disease. That's not what we're talking about. Barbara Snyder, this happened. She's still alive today. Lee Strobel actually did an interview with her, and you can actually look up her medical records and documents and all that good stuff. You can verify it as I'm talking right now. And so, like when you look at Dwayne Miller, again, we're talking about people who have medical documents that shown this is what they were dealing with, and there was supernatural intervention, either whether someone was praying for them, they were speaking God's word, and God just sovereignly allowed it to happen, or whatever the case. And even when it comes to Candy Gunther Brown, yeah, so there were multiple samples. So not only did she do it in Mozambique, but this is a peer-reviewed thing. So it's not just we're not talking about, I had a headache. We're not talking about my stomach hurt. We're talking about people couldn't see, and it verifiably tested them with scientific measures to see whether or not they could see, to know whether or not they can hear, and they verifiably tested these people. And it was immediately after they prayed for them that the census changed. So, I mean, and again, they went to, they went to another place and did the same exact thing. So we're talking about peer-reviewed, studies. So, these are the cases I like to bring up because they're peer-reviewed, they're well documented. You can examine them for yourself. We're not talking about, a little cough, a headache, or, stomach ache and stuff like that. We're talking about things that you can actually test are gone. And what I mean by something that is an irregularity is we know that sight just doesn't come back Like, if I can barely see my hand in front of my face, um, and I can barely see my hand in front of my face, and somebody lays hands on me and they're calling on the name of Jesus for me to be healed, and within minutes I have my sight back. We know that's a natural irregularity. That doesn't just happen. So that's what I mean by something that we know, hey, this is a regular thing we can examine, and then hold on, this is an irregularity. So what I'm saying is, after that, we can philosophically postulate after that, by inferring to the best explanation that this is not a natural explanation. It seems to me that this is a supernatural explanation. And so, of course, we can go into more so how you get to that conclusion, and in our discussion. So,
All right, thank you, Michael. Thank you both for the rebuttals. And now we're going to get to the best part. I think everybody enjoys. We're going to get to this cross examination. So once again, as you can see, I got my camera back. I don't know what's going on, but I got it back. But anyway, 50-minute cross. First 30 minutes gonna be 15 minutes each to ask questions. The other person, please just respond to the question. Do not answer the question with a question. Let's make sure we interact with that question that's being asked. After that, the last 20 minutes it'll be more open discussion, and I will have some questions for you guys. Hopefully, by the time you guys get done. All right. So with that said, Mr. Jeff G, you are up first for a 15-minute cross-examination of Michael.
Cool. Yeah. So I think I was misunderstood when I was talking about different religions. I was basically just trying to say different religions have similar claims to yours that are different in certain ways, be it the God that they claim did it or what they claim happened. So I'm just saying there's no reason to believe, like, if you're willing to turn down other people's claims for that reason, I don't see how somebody who does not come from the worldview of already believing that a certain God exists could ever come to the conclusion that not only was it a God, but that it was a particular God. But that's getting kind of a little farther down the road. Again, to kind of like talk about these claims, you say they're all very well documented by peer-reviewed studies. I'm just curious, like, do you have these studies, and in the conclusion, does it say, like, we cannot think of how this is done, it must be supernatural? Because I have a very hard time believing that would actually come in a case study. I can send you a couple different studies about intercessory prayer. This one, study of the therapeutic effects of intercessory prayer in cardiac bypass patients, a multi-center randomized trial of uncertainty and certainty in receiving intercessory prayer. The conclusion, intercessory prayer itself had no effect on complication-free recovery from CABG, but certainty of receiving intercessory prayer was associated with higher incidence of complications. So some of that performance anxiety. People could definitely lose sight and then get it back. Not in every time, but there are definitely ways that people can lose sight and get it back. And yeah, just the general claim of the irregularity, this kind of seems like a self-selecting thing. It really just seems like an argument from oh my God, what's the word? Basically an argument from incredulity, basically saying this happened. I don't know how it could have happened in any other way than God. Therefore it must be God, which is a fallacy in and of itself. Just because we don't know how something happened doesn't mean it's God. And then from that point to take a leap to deciding which God it is another big logical leap. So I mean, you're talking about people whose bodies healed. They might've healed in pretty crazy ways. But that happens. There are people who, sever their spinal cords more or less, not completely sever, but then they can end up walking again. The body does some pretty crazy stuff. All of these stories, I tried looking for these and I could only find stories. And I know I'm doing a quick Google search, but I could only find stories from like christianpost.com, opentheword.org, like Christian sites. I was not able to find any like third-party review of any of these. It seems to just be people making claims that they were really sick and they weren't supposed to live, but they did, and then God. Yeah, I need much stronger evidence or much stronger connections between the supernatural and these things being done before I'm confident saying that it was anything that wasn't a natural process.
Got some. I can use a question, Jeff.
Oh, okay. I thought, okay. So yeah, I guess.
Good, man. I mean, it doesn't matter, man. I mean, if you want to stick to the format, it's whatever. This is your 15 minutes. I mean, I can not ask a question and be respectful of it. And
I'm the only part that I really care about is like the back and forth. That's not the only part I really care about, but that's my favorite part of the back.
I know
and forth.
What you mean. Yeah, I got you. Yeah, same here. Yeah.
So so I guess to ask questions like I don't know. Do you?
Mm-hmm.
to me, like, these don't even get close to coming to like to meeting a standard of evidence, especially when we have examples of all of these things happening naturally. And these are all kind of anecdotal stories that I at least, if you have like any sort of like documentation about these other than just people's testimony, I would love to see it, because a lot of this sounds pretty incredible. But I mean, going off of people's testimony isn't really like, I don't think that really gets us anywhere, because it's not testable. It's not provable. Yeah, I guess the problem that I'm having here is I don't really have any questions, because I don't really see how any of these examples can be supernatural in the first place. So I guess if you think that there are, I don't know, I wish I had questions for you, but I don't even know where to begin other than saying these seem like natural processes.
So, I guess I'm not sure what natural process would cause a woman who's been, you know, who's had atrophy in her legs for 7 years, um, and who can't eat on her own, can't breathe on her own, can't see, and who hears a voice while her sisters are reading these prayers. So it happens during her sisters reading these prayers that people have sent to her. And she hears a voice saying, "Get up, my child, and walk." I don't know what a natural explanation would be sufficient for that. So,
So
we're not talking
what if,
about, you know, mhm.
sorry, what if she was like
No.
watching like Batman or something, and then she heard "Get up, my child, and walk"? Would that like affect anything? I just, because the reading of it doesn't really mean anything to me in account of like, is that evidence towards it, especially because that seems more like an explanation. If somebody is in a altered state, if being sick and being on drugs would be an altered state, and then there's people around them like talking about God and Jesus and prayer, whether actively or not actively, I can totally see them kind of like picking that up and being like, yeah, prayer, especially if they're a religious person, then they've probably been primed for most of their life to expect a religious end, or to be, or would expect these religious things to happen to them. So if somebody's, I guess, drugged up or in an altered state of mind, and then they hear a name, that's cool. Again, like, unless you have like a documentation of this person healing being literally supernatural, like I can't say anything other than I don't believe that it was a supernatural event, because I don't have enough information, and I've never been shown an example of a supernatural healing that is like verifiable. So the leap for me to go from this was just a crazy natural instance, or the person telling the story is mistaken about their telling of the story, that just seems far more likely to me than this was a supernatural event from a very specific
Jeff,
God.
I gotta call you on it, my man.
Yeah, what's up?
You know, brother, because I guess the problem there is, so psychology, and in this matter, when we're talking about this deep of state of physicality, of someone's physical injury, where even if someone was in a room by themselves and they hear this voice, the effect that you're going to look at is the physical change. If they were one way after, if they were one way for a very long time, and we're saying, hey, we don't know any medicines that could have caused this effect. We don't have any natural explanations for this, but we know that this person heard a voice, and when they heard this voice, we can obviously see the measurable effects on their body afterwards. And so again, her doctors who had been taking care of her examined her to see, okay, your body was this way. After this experience, your body was this way. And so, whether, I I am ignorant of any natural phenomenon that would be you know, that would be a sufficient explanation for such a cause. That
Yeah.
just it just makes no
So
that it makes no sense for me to say, now for me, because I have to say, okay, I understand how nature works. And so it's not that I'm making a claim based off what I don't know. I'm making a claim based off what I knew, what I do know. So, when I'm saying this is how nature works, this is how bodies heal. I can, we know that, if I get a cut on my skin, my body's going to heal itself. My body's programmed to heal itself to a certain degree. But if I have multiple sclerosis, and my legs, literally, I have atrophy to the point to where like my calves are sunken in because I have not walked in 7 years. I can't see. My fingers are curled all the way back to my wrist. I've seen people in this conditions, and the majority of these people don't make it out of this condition. They deal with it for the rest of their life. And to say that this experience was irrelevant to the effect that it had on her physical body just uh, seems like you're leaning on a lot of skepticism that is not being generous to the uh, you know to the
No,
effect, man.
what I'm saying is that I don't believe that you've demonstrated that there is a link between these things. Again, first of all, this seems like a very anecdotal story that we can't even at least I haven't been able to prove the veracity of it. Number two, again, it seems to be somebody healing a lot. It's still just somebody was in a bad place and then they said a prayer and then they were better, allegedly. This is all allegedly too. That's all I can work on. Like you said, what happened? I don't know. I don't have enough information. Until we can show that the supernatural exists, though, there's no reason to believe that something supernatural happened there.
It sounds like we're minimizing the physical effect, though. I'm not talking about a headache.
But again,
because I'm with you there,
matter.
Jeff. Like if I got a stomach ache, if I got I got a headache, I've seen that. I'll be honest with you. You got a cold and you've had we know colds last for about 2 weeks.
The severity of the injury doesn't matter. No, because again, the story could be completely fake for all I know. These people could just be lying. I don't know. We don't have any sort of documentation on it. There's never been, as far as I can tell, there's never been a peer-reviewed study where they just came out and said, especially not claiming that they think it was supernatural. There's plenty of times where doctors say we don't know what happened, but that's all they say. They don't claim that there's something supernatural.
Oh no, I'm with you.
Again, with this story,
saying that you don't know what happened doesn't immediately mean that it's supernatural. I'm with you.
Yeah, that's all we can say until you can show me separately from this instance. So again, what supernatural is and how these things relate to each other. Until you have examples of this, we can't say that this is an example because we don't know. Especially if this person has been again. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know what it could be.
It was actually documented in the Chicago Tribune, and they write about the doctors that were actually, and they write about the doctors who were actually visiting with her, and the doctors that were taking care of her. Again, both doctors wrote books on this on the subject, so it's not that it's undocumented. It's just there is documentation on it. So and again, I offered one that's compiled data. It's not just one case. We're talking about people that the effects of their degree were measured, and so we're talking about people who had lost sight. And it's not just that they lost sight. Ooh, okay, hey, I had my vision was a little blurry. Now I can see better. No, we're talking about people who they could not hear jackhammers going off. And after they were prayed, it was specifically, hey, they were prayed and they were laid hands on in the name of Jesus, that immediately after they were tested and they could hear. So, I mean, I got to say, I'm like, okay, again, this is a journal. And not only is it a journal, it's a peer-reviewed journal. You can actually go to that. So I'm not just talking about, yes, because you're completely right. I'll give it to you. There are. Yeah, so I'll send them to you afterwards. I don't know if I can send them to you right now. Yeah, but I'll send you the actual study. So the actual study where you can just examine it yourself. I looked it over. And so, even she was,
So sorry, in peer-reviewed studies, there's typically an abstract and a conclusion, and I'm just curious if in these peer-reviewed studies, if they came to any sort of supernatural conclusion, and if in the review any other scientists that reviewed this agreed with their conclusion that this could only be explained by supernatural means, because I've never heard of a peer-reviewed paper like that at all.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, no, I'll send those to you as well. Yeah.
All right. This the proof of the supernatural would win the Nobel Prize and would be one of the biggest findings in the history of science. So I'm very interested to read this, because again, you're telling me a lot of these really really stories of people that have gone through a lot and have apparently been healed and all this. But all I'm hearing is stories of a person who was in a bad state and then they were in a good state, and because in the middle these people were praying, we're just claiming that it was a god. However, we're unable to demonstrate that there was anything supernatural. We're unable to show any examples of what the supernatural is or how it works. What are the mechanics of this? She prayed, and then do the fibers of her muscles grow back? Does she get more cellular structure? Because if that's the case, then she'll probably need to take in a lot of calories, so she would have to eat a lot. Unless we're just talking about breaking all the rules of physics and physiology and chemistry, I'm just really, I don't get the mechanics behind how any of this works or how
I
we
don't
can make that
I don't
connection.
I guess I'm not sure how that breaks the rules. I mean, are you concerned that a miracle I'm sorry, are you concerned that a miracle or a supernatural experience would violate the laws of nature?
No,
Is
I
that
mean,
is that your
what I'm
concern?
saying, is that what might be considered good evidence for something being supernatural, like with this woman who healed. I'm just trying to come off the top of my head of what could be considered good
I
evidence because
guess
it has to be
no, that's okay, man.
falsifiable.
Yeah.
So if it was saying like, okay, her legs were atrophied, therefore they were basically just skin and bone, and then they pray, and then 10 minutes later, an hour later, a day later, whatnot, her legs are muscular and toned, and she can walk around with them again. In order for something like that
It
to happen,
happened
you
this
typically
it
would have
happened
to
at the
have.
same moment.
Okay, well, see, that would be miraculous because she would have to gain a lot of body weight. She would have to gain a lot of muscle.
Yes,
She
I
would have
know.
to
That's
gain a
what
lot of
happened.
muscle
Yeah.
fiber. Yeah. So, I mean, if this is what happened, if she
That's the claim they were
instantaneously,
making.
if she
Yes.
instantaneously gained all this, I feel like
Yes.
this would be. I just have a very hard time believing that there is either a peer-reviewed paper that comes out and says this woman instantaneously gained like 10 pounds of muscle, and that number two, if this paper does exist, that nobody is paying attention to it and that they're just throwing it away, because this could be considered good evidence for the supernatural, right? This wouldn't prove the
No, I
supernatural,
agree.
but you could actually point to this and say, hey, this would be good evidence.
Right. It'd
But
be
what you're
good
telling me right
evidence.
now,
Right. Proof is
what you're
a different
telling,
thing, but evidence,
yeah,
yeah,
but
I'm with you.
again, I don't even think that this is meeting that criteria of evidence, because we're not even getting that far. We're just saying, here's a story where somebody was too weak to have been healed and then they got healed. And I'm saying I don't know any information about this story. All I know is that what it says in here seems to violate every rule of everything that I know of. And if I don't know about the story and it violates everything, then the only rational conclusion I can come to is that somebody along this chain, be it the person telling the story, be it you reading the story, be it a malicious person in between who's just lying, somebody is misinformed. That just seems like a much more reasonable solution to me than
Yeah, but you
a
got a
woman
problem there, though.
violated the laws of physics. Where's the problem there?
Yeah, so here's where
Hey
the problem
guys,
comes in.
just to let you know that Jeff 15 minutes expired. So if you want to continue this conversation, I don't mind the back and forth with you guys. You guys seem cool. So if you guys want to go back and forth, that's cool. No problem
Okay.
there. All
Yeah,
right.
I'm cool with that,
Just leave
Jeff.
it
You
up to
cool
you.
with that, Jeff?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, man. I like it. Yeah, I'm cool with this, man. If I got questions, I'll just bring them up. You know what I mean?
All right.
Um, you know, yeah, you're on my time now. Not just playing. No, but yeah, man. So I guess my thing is here is that the difference is is that where were we at, man? What was the last thing you said, Jeff?
I was basically just saying that, like, you're basically, I have to take these stories at your word because I don't know anything about them, and what you're telling me is that some supernatural experience happened, but what I have to do is appeal to what is, like, basically I have to look at the evidence I have and say, is it more likely that a supernatural occurrence happened and this woman just was healed miraculously in the span of a second, which has never been documented, which is completely which is untestable, it's just unrepeatable, or should I just say that someone is either wrong or lying down the chain of the story? And it seems to me far more likely
Gotcha.
that somebody
I see
is
what
just
you're saying.
incorrect or lying.
So you're
down the
trying to
chain of
weigh
the
it
story.
out then, right? Yeah. So that's the thing is that so not all of it has to be repeatable. We know that there are claims that, like, for example, you got historical science where there are things where you have to evaluate from the best and you have to make an inference from the evidence that's left over. So you just have to be reasoning properly to be able to look at the evidence that's left over. So not everything
Yeah.
is not everything is repeatable, right? So if we're talking about
Do you
historical
mind if
science,
I?
like, for example, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, to interject here. I'm sorry if I'm cutting you off first. If you're going to talk more about the
No, man,
historical
you're
stuff,
good.
I thought you were going to move on. So, yeah, like we can't. So you can do repeatable tests when it comes to things like history, right? Like, for instance, if you go to Greece and your hypothesis is there was a battle that happened here, then you would expect to find certain things here. So you can say, due to this other information we found over here, we believe that there was a battle here that happened at this time, which means that we should find artifacts in this layer of soil. And you can predict that. And if you go down there and find that, you can say, our prediction is more likely to be true now that we found this stuff. That doesn't mean that it's 100% true. There could have been something else, but that's still a prediction you can make with the information at hand when it comes to, like, history.
But Jeff, did you recreate the actual historical events, or did you find events that made sense in light of what you consider had already happened? Like, for example, if somebody comes in this room, we don't have the camera on, somebody shoots me, right?
Hmm.
You can't repeat that. I'm dead. I'm gone. That's not getting repeated. Now, what you have
Yeah,
to do is you would have to look at the leftover evidence. You would have to make the best inference based on the explanation or based on the evidence left behind. And so
true.
you're not going to be able to repeat that. So
I mean,
there's
you
just
can
certain things
repeat
that you
certain
can.
parts of it, though. That's a part of how they like find murderers. They do blood splash tests. They'll do
Correct,
bullet
correct.
velocity
But you're
tests.
not
There's Yeah,
correct.
you can't recreate you being murdered, but you can
Yes,
recreate things around it and piece together a story. You will never have 100%
correct.
certainty of anything. That's impossible. What you do
Oh
is you
no, no,
build
no.
up
I agree
evidence and
with
come
that,
to the best conclusion you have. And so far, there
which
doesn't
is
seem
my
to be
point.
any evidence for the
So
supernatural.
So again, I just laid out evidence. Now you can now whether or not you believe the evidence is strong is a different argument. But
I don't
whether or
think it
not I
meets the
gave you evidence, yeah.
I don't think the
So then what
qualification of like
necessarily
usable
would
evidence.
so I guess we would have to evaluate your structure of what it means for it to be sufficient evidence. So
I mean, maybe
what's your structure again?
because anecdotal evidence like is technically evidence, right? But the problem is anecdotal evidence can be used for anecdotal evidence isn't very reliable.
Define
Um,
define anecdotal for us so we can see whether or not
basically,
anecdotal is being used properly with the examples I gave.
basically just somebody telling you that something happened. Like if I
Yeah,
tell
no, that's
you I
false
have a
though, because
what do
I
you
didn't
mean?
present. And so, for example,
These no,
like
the
Candy
evidence you're
Gunther Brown.
presenting is anecdotal. It's stories people are
So,
telling about their situation. If they don't have any like medical records or any hard evidence behind it, then that's anecdotal.
but all of them do. That's what I'm saying. Literally, all
But
of
like
them
again,
have medical records. Yeah.
but if
No. Yeah. Yeah.
unless you
Go
can
ahead. Go
show
ahead.
me like where they come to the
I'll
conclusion, I
send it to you
just
when we get done.
okay. I mean,
So, for
I can't really
example,
say
when
anything
you
about
got
it until then.
so again, if you got Dwayne Miller, who's he spent all his darn insurance trying to figure out what's going on with his voice. 63 physicians don't know what's going on. You got a Swiss symposium that he went before, and they can't figure out what's going on with his throat. And they're saying, hey, the prognosis is you're not getting your throat, like you're not getting your voice back. And supernaturally, or you can say that, hey, when he was reading God's word, and he just so happened to be reading God's word, and he's talking about diseases, how God heals us from diseases. And when he's doing that, the sensation that was on his voice is released. And so it's like, okay, well, I'm sorry, what's the natural explanation for that? And he still has
Well,
his voice as of now. And so I'm saying, so we have medical records to show what his voice was looking like. And we can examine, like it's on a recording. You can listen to it yourself. I listened to it, kind of scared me the
yeah,
first time I
no,
heard it. I was like, that
I
was
don't
weird.
doubt that these people
And
believe that this
yeah,
happened at all.
yeah, so belief, and then again, we have medical records to show no, like this guy actually his voice was gone. And or when you're looking up the Candy Gunther Brown, when you're looking at the examples within, again, I'll send you the study when we get done. When you're looking at the examples that were done with the sight, and when you're looking at the studies that were done with the hearing, they tested them prior to. It wasn't just somebody vocally saying, "I have this." No, they tested them. Then they prayed and they tested them again. And they prayed in Jesus' name. And you had these type of responses to that specific prayer. And so
So
now, yeah,
oh,
go
I
ahead,
was
man.
just going to say, I would love to see that right there is a test that would be repeatable, that would be falsifiable, all of these things. And I've already
Yeah, they
found
took it
other
again.
studies. I mean, I've already found other studies that have showed counter, like that have been counter. And especially when it's something like intercessory prayer, which seems to work at about a 50-50 rate, then you would expect
Hmm.
that to happen. I just, there, if somebody could prove that they could heal like blind people by touching them, I feel like that would be front page news and people would be healing. Like if you have
I
that
know.
ability and you're not going
I
out
mean,
there and
not if you
healing
have a
people,
scientific motivation not to spread it. If you got a, if you have an
what's the
a
scientific
priori that's leaning and yeah, what's up,
what's
man?
the scientific motivation not to spread it?
Well, if you have like I'll give you this is just a separate example to kind of give toward it. Like for example, if you look into this is again this is not dealing with what we're talking about. I'm just giving an example from like another area of science.
Mm-hmm.
So like right now, what you have going on within the scientific community, especially from academia, in terms of the gender spectrum right now. The gender spectrum, whether or not you can identify as such and such or whatever, uh, the vast majority of scientists will tell you, from academia at least, will tell you are now coming on now on the scene will tell you, yes, that you can, that there is this spectrum of gender that
Mhm.
you can happen to identify on and ping on at any moment in time, or whatever that people can experience, right? Well, the problem with that is that the majority of these scientists are not being ethical or not being honest with their scientific studies, and they have political means and political. And now, the reason why I say that is because you have other scientists who are losing their job for coming forth with the truth. And so I'm saying that a lot of times, I'm not saying this is in all cases. What I'm saying is that
I know
sometimes you can lend towards that people have political biases for or means for why they won't come forward with it, or yet people have deep, staunch religious or anti-religious views that they refuse to come. Now, I'm not saying that's I'm not saying that's the
I
end all
know,
be all, but I'm saying that's
and
a possible explanation as to why people don't come
it
forward with
is.
this stuff, man.
And these things do happen,
Possible
and I would
explanation.
say if yeah, and
Correct.
these things do happen
Yes.
in these individual instances. I would say let's call them out. But I think
Yeah,
I think even with your
man.
example, I think even with your example, I think this is just like an indicator that I just don't think that you're. I don't know, like for the gender spectrum stuff, I would actually love if y'all do debates on stuff like this. I would love to talk to you about that in a separate conversation, because I'm pretty well read on this stuff, especially the not medical literature, because I'm not like a medical doctor or anything. I just like reading it.
Gotcha.
But these are all coming down to like our understandings of things, right? And how our understandings update. And if you're going to say that there's like a giant conspiracy, then I would say, cool. Again, you have to show me. Just because scientists are coming up with conclusions that seem counter to what you believe isn't really showing that these people are like hiding the truth. And I would even counter that.
No, I agree with
scientists,
that. Yeah, I agree with that.
So I don't know. Again, like when it comes to these examples, I don't know. You're just saying give me a better explanation for
Jeff. What I was providing was a possible reason as to why people don't come forward with certain. That's all I was doing, and I was laying down a certain possible. I'm not saying it's end all be all. What I'm saying, if you're saying, well, I would expect it to be front page news, and I'm saying, well, if you have people that really don't want this stuff out there, then no, I don't expect it to be front page news. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on right now that I mean, like right now we're we're verifiably seeing people shutting down stories that they don't like right now. I mean, that's a separate story, but I'm just saying that we're seeing these things verifiably right now. That if it doesn't fit just because
one thing is potentially happening in one space doesn't mean it's happening in another. And I would just say that you are compounding and you're making this
a possible explanation.
It is, but if we're just trying to we're trying to find the solution here, and I feel like with all of these things, you're just compounding it and making it more and more difficult to come to the solution. When we could just take Occam's razor to this and just say somebody was mistaken along the way. That's a much more likely scenario, especially when and if you're going to say things like, well, give me a better explanation. That's another argument from incredulity. That's just saying something happened and I don't know what happened. The only explanation I can think of is this one, therefore it's this. What if is there a way that you can show me that it was God and or specifically your God and not aliens with alien healing beam that like to play pranks on Christians who are in hospitals and like listen for that? Because to me, those are both equally as likely. I have no evidence for either one, and they're both equally as likely. One actually is more so because I might actually have I could have probably actually make an argument that aliens could exist within the natural world as opposed to like a supernatural phenomenon. So I would say the aliens are probably even more likely than a god.
Yeah. So, the thing is that when you examine these cases, I think when you try to detach certain variables from it, then you can, or when you try to minimize the actual physical effects that we all know, like for example, Jeff, if somebody told you after having a cold a week and a half, and somebody laid hands on them in the name of Jesus, they were healed. I'm gonna be honest with you, Jeff. I'm probably gonna lean with you and say, no, you probably just were done with the cold. Okay. If somebody has a headache or something like that, and they've had a headache for a couple hours or whatever, and somebody lays hands on them and it goes away, I'm with you. A lot of those cases, I'm with you. Or we all see the videos of people, of these charlatans on YouTube causing people's legs to grow longer and stuff like that. Look, we got people that fake stories. We can verify that a lot of stuff is fake. What I'm offering you is I'm talking about where you can actually test that a person's body is in a certain condition. There was an effect that caused a physical effect to be different. And so I don't necessarily have to say, I don't have to know necessarily how. I'm not sure how,
Well,
but I do know how nature works. And so hold on. It's because I know how nature works and I know nature doesn't do that. And so I have to say,
how do you
because
know?
I know,
I'm just curious how you know
well,
nature can't do that, but you do know that there is a supernatural. It just seems like your
yeah.
confidence in this. I don't know. I'm just confused as to how you can
So,
make claims about one thing but not another.
so really, ultimately, why I can lean more supernatural is not just on these experiences. These experiences or these testimonies or examples are an outworking flow of ultimately when I look at all of creation. And so when ultimately, like when I'm trying to examine the world and how I understand the world, what's the best explanation for creation? What's the best explanation for reality? It all that can make sense within a theistic worldview. The problem is it doesn't make sense in an atheistic worldview. And so the
Oh, for
problem
sure it
is
does.
that you have to lean back to your a priori. And so, well, I'm saying, so for example, I mean, when I'm saying that, a person who, you know, literally like you can medically show the condition that they're in, and after a certain thing happened to them, they were, there's no natural explanation for it. You're saying, oh well, you know, I mean, even you yourself are, exclaiming that, okay, that seems to me that would meet the standard of a miracle. And I'm saying, yes, I know, because I'm not trying to bring up little itty bitty cases like a headache or a stomach ache. I'm talking about
The
cases where
the
somebody was severely physically damaged and there was no way for them to naturally get better.
Yeah, so the severity doesn't really matter. You could have somebody grow all their arms and legs back, and they could have grown them back right after saying, "God, please heal my arms and legs," and that might be pretty good evidence that something's happening. But the thing is, you still can't make that connection with these people. That again,
Why
I don't
not?
know if I necessarily
Why
believe
not,
the.
Jeff?
No, I'm saying like you literally
Jeff,
can't.
why not?
If you're saying there's a study, if you're looking at somebody and you say they're sick, and then afterwards they're healed, and then something happened in between, but you don't know what that something is, all you can say is I don't know. And you especially can't jump to a conclusion that has never before been
Well, in
demonstrated
terms
in
of
any
what?
other way, shape, or
What are
form.
you saying in terms
What I'm
in
saying
terms
is,
of what are you saying? I don't know. Because I'm telling
unless
you
you
what
are
the
able,
difference was. I'm telling you what the interaction was.
but unless you're able to like show me how, like, unless you're able to give me an example of the supernatural, just saying that one thing happened that I can't explain doesn't mean that the supernatural happened. This woman was sick
Yeah,
and then
so
she was
not
healed. I can't explain that. That's
so
all you
by
can
what
say. So
so
until you
by
can show me what happened.
what measure of it am I saying can't be explained? Because I'm telling you what caused it. I don't necessarily think that you need to, get in there and look at the fibers. I can say, hey, listen, we know people's bodies don't grow back like this. We know this stuff doesn't happen. That's the regularity. People don't just, like, for example, if dead people were getting up all the time when Jesus, when the apostles claimed that Jesus rose, would it be
Mhm.
nobody would have been concerned that it was a miracle. Because we're like, well, this stuff happens all the time. It's the irregularities that catch our attention.
But again,
It's not the regularities.
yeah, but again, this is like a God of the gaps thing, because these irregularities to
No.
people in the past were just ignorances. These were things that people didn't know. If people
So,
started coming from the dead,
and I
that would be
agree,
something that would be agreed as an irregularity. But what if we start
but
examining
they
these
did.
dead people and then we discover, oh, there's a fungus that infects their brain and brings them back to life? We have a naturalistic explanation. So there's no reason. What I'm saying is, until you can show it and give me an example of how it works, then there's no reason to say that something supernatural happened in a
Yeah, but
world that
Jeff,
we
that's
only
science
know
of
the
the
natural.
gaps. Jeff, that's
No,
science of the
that's not
gaps. What
sides
you're
of the gaps.
so no, listen, this is what I'm saying. So what I'm saying is I can say based on what I do know that that's irregular. That's irregular. You're
But why?
saying,
Why is
well,
what you
because I
know?
don't know, at some point science is going to explain it. And that's science
No,
of the
I'm not
gaps.
saying. No,
And
I'm
that
not
and
saying
that's
science is going
blind
to
faith.
explain it. No, no, no. Okay, let me put this. What I am saying is that until we have an actual reason, then we shouldn't say that we know. The God of the gaps is saying, if I was to say that everything can have a scientific explanation, then I guess that would be some sort of science of the gaps. But I'm not saying that. I'm saying until we actually have an explanation that is, again, repeatable, independently verifiable, strongly tied to a specific discrete hypothesis, and falsifiable. Until we have something that meets these claims, then we can't really, we can say maybe that we have a good idea of how something happened, but until then we can't make a claim that it's supernatural, especially if the only evidence that you have that it was supernatural was they said some words at this particular time and then they were healed. There's just, again, I'm not seeing like, I'm not seeing how you're making that connection or what the mechanics behind the supernatural healing are.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for you, Michael, I never seen an evolution of like using biblical support in order to argue for supernatural claims. What do you think? Is there biblical support that will supply or supplant or codify your argument for supernatural claims? Is supernatural claims irrational?
Oh, yeah, gotcha. Yeah, so I mean, I do think that there's biblical. I was just trying to give more modern day something that we can look at, and evaluate, with doctors and things like that. But in terms of, to me, I think the two best ones, like for example, if we're talking about, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I mean, you can there are plenty of scientific and philosophical models that can show that the beginning of the universe or the origins of the universe make sense clearly with the Genesis picture. So, like for example, Scripture says that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Well, it says that there was a beginning. Well, most of us are very, very familiar with what's called the Kalam cosmological argument in the beginning, or premise number one, that whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And it's a deductive argument that basically when you follow it, it clearly makes sense that whatever caused our universe to exist had to have been spaceless, timeless, immaterial, an unembodied mind, had to have had the personal choice to do so. Because when you actually track the science down and you track the origins of our universe, in order to say that nature created nature is nonsensical. So I think that the biblical testimony of the beginning of our universe lays forth that it seems that if verse 1 is true, all of it is probable to be true. Like it makes sense that like it gives a good picture. This is what I mean by that, Jeff. If verse 1 is true, it lays down a foundation. Yeah. If verse 1 is true, it lays down a very strong foundation for the rest of the testimonies to be true. It makes sense. God raising somebody from the dead is nothing if we can create all things from nothing. So,
what you got, Jeff? Man? Jeff, you over there grimacing and facial expressions? What's going on, man?
So, first of all, just because one thing in a certain text is true does not mean that another part in the certain text is true. Spider-Man lives in New York City. No, you said if the first part is true, we have a good reason to believe that the rest of it is true. That's not how
it lays down a good foundation for the rest of that to be true. Like for example, if that's literally what I left on, because I'm saying if we're saying that if it's true that God created the heavens and the earth, if God created all space-time reality, then we have a really good framework by which we can look at the rest of the world and say, well, miracles actually make sense through that concept.
So again, this is all just begging the question. You're assuming the conclusion before you move into anything. First of all, I would dispute that the Genesis account is true because he creates light before he creates the stars, which doesn't really seem like that follows. But whatever. To me, these are all not meant to be taken literally. Secondly,
no, it's not.
To just say if the first verse is true, then we should believe that the rest of it is true. No, like again, I've read Spider-Man stories where he goes to New York and the drawings of New York are great. You can see New York bridges. That doesn't mean that Spider-Man exists.
I will stop you there, Jeff. I will stop you there because wouldn't you say that Spider is not a real historical person? Spider-Man is not a real historical. Yes, it was plotted in New York and things like that. New York is a real historical place, but Spider-Man is not considered a real historical person, such as a person like Jesus Christ, Paul the Apostle, these individuals who are considered historical individuals. So when we look at the New Testament, when we look at the Old Testament, and we see these supernatural claims of somebody who's a historical person like Jesus Christ, and people were so much in belief that they were willing to die for the claims that the belief that Jesus Christ is who he is, and he did the things that he did. So what would you say to that if these individuals, these eyewitnesses, were willing to lay down their lives for a lie? Do you really believe that they would, if they really believe that it was true? Believe that these individuals will lay down a life for a lie, a known lie, when science actually shows that that's not true? That would not happen.
Yeah, no, I agree. No, I think they would believe the claim is true. We can show not just for Christians, but for people of all religions and no religions. We see people, Spartans, stoically laying down their lives because they think that's the best way to get into heaven. You see Norse people back in the day laying down their lives because they thought that was how they got to Valhalla. We see this all over the place. Somebody has a very strong conviction that they believe to be true, regardless of whether or not they have good evidence. They're willing to do things like lay down their life for it. So it doesn't surprise me at all that people are willing to die for a certain cause that they believe in. I'm just saying, I don't think that they're justified in making those claims, or I don't think their beliefs comport with reality.
Well, we're talking about firsthand accounts.
Go ahead, Michael.
We're talking about firsthand accounts, eyewitness. We're talking about eyewitness testimony. We're not talking about people who heard a thing and they very strong. Well, hold on. We're not talking about people who heard a thing and heard a thing from another person who heard a thing and they very strongly believe it. We're talking about people who were at the crux of the situation, and these people gained nothing by their testimony. They lost everything that they had, and the only thing and they went and literally traded their lives to spread what they perceived as the truth. And so we're talking about eyewitness testimony of people who knew Jesus died and then they saw Jesus alive again. And if we're going to talk about some weird fungus going on, trying to be the explanation for that, I mean, come on, And so we're simply talking about is eyewitness testimony for the sincerity of what they experienced. Which, to me, when this is another one of those things of historical sciences where you can look through history and just look through the different variables and see how reliable the accounts are, because the New Testament documents are very reliable historically.
About some things, definitely not a lot of other things. I would say that a lot of historians, so there's things that are empirically provable about, as much as you can about history and things that aren't. So when we look at people's, first of all, these are supposed firsthand accounts of what happened that have been translated multiple times. A lot of the books of the Bible were written about 200 years after the supposed death of Jesus. They were secondhand accounts of apparent firsthand accounts by people from 2,000 something years ago who held dogmatic beliefs.
Where are you getting that from? Yeah, where are you getting these dates from? Where are you getting these dates from? I can listen. They have right now. If you go to CTS or what is it? CSNTM. You can look at manuscripts that come from the 1st century. Right now, you can look at manuscripts that come from 1st century. There were definitely Dan Wallace.
Yeah, there were definitely. You can look at. You can look at. The New Testament. I know.
So we can't talk about. You said the New Testament predates Jesus. What do you mean by that?
Doesn't the New Testament predate Jesus? I could be wrong, because the New Testament I thought has been around longer than Jesus has been around, because Judaism has been around longer than Jesus was around. So the New Testament is just the Jewish Bible.
So the resurrection created the New Testament. The New Testament didn't create the resurrection. The historical account of the resurrection is what caused the New Testament.
I meant to say Old Testament. Sorry, about. Old Testament. I was thinking Old Testament.
Okay.
My bad.
Okay, I understand.
My bad. Old Testament. Yeah. I was saying New Testament the whole time, and in my head I was like, old. Mm-hmm. Old. Okay, yeah. My bad.
Gotcha.
Old Testament.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Okay, so basically what I would say is there are things. No, you're good. There are things in the Bible that we can empirically prove. We can show that there was a city called Jerusalem. We can show that Pontius Pilate existed as a person. We can show that we know the history of Pontius Pilate. There are other things in the Bible that we can't empirically prove, but we could still technically believe, right? Like, as far as I know, we can't empirically prove that Jesus was a person and this is who he is and all that, but we have a pretty good idea that there was probably a dude named Yeshua who preached these new ideas and new beliefs that were pretty radical for the time, right? That was
Jeff. I'm sorry. You said from the scriptures that. You're saying from the New Testament?
No, these are separate from the scriptures. I'm talking about things that we can prove separate. Because I don't take anything the Bible says.
Oh, okay,
you can reference the Bible and it means nothing to me.
Yeah, but why? Why?
Because there's so much in the Bible that's
even closer than any. No, but
there's so much in the Bible that's verifiably
closer
false.
To any. So So this is what I mean. Before we can even tackle that, the scriptures
Yeah.
that are written about Jesus are written
Yeah.
closer than any text that you're going to find that you're going to try to collude along right alongside of it. So like even when you get down to some of the Jewish and Greek historians, we're talking about 70, or I'm sorry, we're talking about 100 and 150 years later and so on. And so
Hmm.
when you examine the actual documents, those documents can have been written within 6 months to to as late as 65 years later. So, and what you will find, what historians will find, and what the vast majority of Greek New Testament scholars will find is that the testament of who Jesus was is actually pretty consistent throughout history. There is no jump or leap from Jesus being this normal person to 100 years later there being this uh you know uh jump to him being a miracle worker. The stories about Jesus and who Jesus was have been consistent throughout all the texts and throughout all of the historical finds about him. You will find that he was a miracle worker. You will find that he had people that died believing that he was. You will find that all of the miraculous accounts that you are looking for will be there from beginning to end with him. Nothing's going to
Yeah,
differ.
but again, you can do this with other people in history as well. You can do this with Zoroaster. You can do this with Muhammad. You can do this with a whole bunch of different people who also believe that these people did miraculous things. I don't doubt that
No,
people
no. With
legitimately
Muhammad, the
believe that
Hadith came
miraculous
along
things
a
were done.
hundred. No, no. Literally, you can track with Muhammad. The Hadith came along a
Yeah,
hundred
but
years later and was added
it
on.
doesn't.
Literally,
Yeah, it doesn't. But
you can
I,
verifiably track that 100 years later. That and literally,
that
Muhammad
doesn't
says
mean
the only
anything, though.
miracle that he. Well, I'll tell you from Muhammad. Muhammad says that the only miracle that he gave was the Quran. So I mean, and that's not saying much. So I'm saying when you
So
actually
again,
look throughout it and you actually examine it thoroughly, it's just not true when you try to compare it alongside Christ.
but if you want to say that there was a person named Yeshua or whatever his name was that lived back then that said he was the son of God and preached all this, I am right there with you, because we can actually find some evidence of this. But when you start saying things like he performed miracles and he healed lepers, we have some people writing this stuff, but that's all we have. We don't have any actual evidence that he did this. We don't have evidence that this can be proven. All we have is the Bible saying that this is true, but it also makes a lot of other
Yeah.
pretty out there
So then why is
claims.
it false? Like,
I'm not saying it's
but why
false.
is
I'm
it
saying
false
that you
though?
haven't met the burden of proof to prove that it's real. Therefore, I have no reason to believe it until you can prove to me that it's real. I'm not saying that it never happened, because I can't prove that. But what I'm saying is, in the world that I live in and in the world that we know of, there has never been anybody who has ever been able to show that you can do something like turn water into wine, that you can just
Yeah,
heal a
but you're
leper
talking
by
about
touching it. We have nobody
demonstrations.
to show this. Yeah, how else do you know
Yeah, but you're
something's
talking
true
about
unless you
demonstration.
can?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
when you're talking about
why is
when
nobody
you're talking
able
about
to?
a demonstration, because you're
That's how
changing the
evidence
goalposts.
works,
You went
though.
from evidence.
No,
Hold
we're
on,
talking about, is it
but
rational? And
hold
if you
on.
don't have evidence, it's irrational.
Yeah, hold on. But evidence is not the same as a demonstration, and you know that, right? So you can have evidence, but it doesn't demonstrate that the thing actually happened. Even an illustration is not a demonstration. And so this is what I'm
Just
saying, where
be,
you're moving the goalpost around.
just because somebody said it
Because
happened in
at
the Bible
first,
doesn't mean it actually happened, though.
oh no, I agree with you. I agree with you. But
So
that's not
if it
what.
didn't happen,
No Christian thinker is simply saying, oh, simply because they said it, it happened. No, you can actually look at not only the historical. So when you actually look throughout the scripture, it is it is internally coherent. And so a lot of the
mm,
stories that you'll find is that when you look at different stories throughout scripture, as a matter of fact, like there are certain stories that Mark will confirm that John will confirm Mark, and like Matthew will confirm, or Mark will confirm Matthew, and there are just different intricacies within the stories that they will confirm one another, and so that's the pro. And so trying to say that, oh well, it's just one person said
wait,
something.
but
Well, no, we have multiple we have multiple testimonies, and we have testimonies from different people saying very similar things.
yeah. So we have this happen today. We have hundreds of thousands and thousands of people every year say that they've been abducted by aliens or that they've seen aliens, and they legitimately believe it with 100% of their heart. They cannot prove that they have seen aliens in any way, shape, or form. we don't just take them at their word that they actually saw aliens. Now, you can believe that they legitimately think that they saw aliens, but there's probably a better solution. One of the most postularized ones is people are experiencing lucid dream states and they don't understand what it is. So it manifests as like an alien abduction. There are plenty of things that we can have a bunch of people claiming to happen, but if we don't have any examples of it outside of these people saying they saw it, then there's no way for me to believe these people. It takes a far smaller leap of logic and leap of faith to say they're mistaken until they can show me that what they're saying is true, than it is to say, well, they said that they saw something miraculous happen, therefore I should just believe that this can happen now.
Yeah, but
some testimony from people a long time ago. You can't just say that, Jeff, though. You can't just say nobody's doing that.
Yeah.
Nobody's being mistaken about what they saw.
No, Jeff, that's not what I'm saying. So just saying a person said this happened to him, therefore it's true. Neither one of us have presented that argument. What I'm saying is that you have multiple people making the same claims, and these people are willing to die for their claims. We're not talking about, hey, I tell you, hey, I was have you seen ISIS?
They go out there killing themselves because they think that they have a legit claim. Does that make their claim true?
Name one eyewitness for ISIS. You can't, and that's the problem.
I don't know what you mean.
So this is what I mean. I'm saying we're talking about eyewitness testimony. We're not talking about people 200 years later that believe a thing, from some documents written down. We're talking about eyewitness testimony, people who were actually there, people who were willing to give their life for what they saw, and people who experienced it. And so this is and what we're talking about is people who were against it and actually ended up changing their mind because they had this experience with Christ. Paul, for example, Paul was a person who was literally going out to destroy the church, and on his way and on the road to Damascus, the guy who was destroying the church became the most forth-running apostle. And then we're talking about James, the brother of Jesus, who ended up going afterwards, who was completely, James as well, and even Thomas. These guys did not believe. One was a doubter, and the other didn't believe. And then we have Paul, and so we have these people who did not believe. One of them was actively trying to destroy the church, and then came the most forth-running apostle. And it's honestly probably one of the serious reasons why we even have Christianity in the Western world anyway, because he was giving his life so much to spread the gospel. So we're not talking about people that were 100 years later. We're not talking about people that are 75 years later that came along that heard a thing. We're talking about people who were at the crux of the situation, who saw these things with their own eyes, and they gave us a passed down hand, they handed down an eyewitness testimony account of what they experienced and what they saw. And just to write it off because you're saying,
no, I'm writing it off because the only evidence we have is that a book claims that people claim that they saw a thing, and their explanation was God. Where we have people today that's a
misrepresentation. That's a misrepresentation.
But what you're saying, but what you're saying is people had eyewitness accounts because a book says that people have eyewitness accounts. You haven't talked to these people, so we don't actually know their firsthand accounts. And second of all, even if that is the case, I can show you people today that have firsthand accounts of why the earth is flat, that aliens abducted them. We don't take firsthand accounts. It can be a piece of evidence if it is put together with a whole bunch of other very good, verifiable, testable evidence. But with a lack of all that, you don't just take.
Like for example,
it's not though.
Like for example,
you don't have
like for example, you have an empty tomb. You have an empty tomb on your hands. How does the tomb become empty with guards that are guarding it? And then and guards who are guarding who know how to much defend their lives. Yeah, yes, they do. And so if the tomb is sealed, then please tell me how the guy gets out. Please tell me how the guy gets out. I'd love to hear.
Number one, it's not up to me to tell you how your stuff works. Number two, again, you're just saying there was a tomb, there was a guy in it. We came back and it was empty. Therefore, he must have ascended into heaven. These are huge logical leaps that we have no evidence of, that haven't.
Well, it's only logical leaps because you're making missteps, man. Because when you try to disintegrate it down and remove all the variables, then it sounds really silly. But if you put all the variables in place, it becomes a lot stronger. Like, for example, we know the guards that were there. or I'm sorry, we know the guards were there. Even if guards fall asleep,
I
who
don't know
moved the
if we
stone?
do.
The stone was
How
too
do we
heavy
know the
for
guards
any
were
just
there?
single person
Wait,
to.
how do we know? How
Yes.
do we know
So
guards were there? These
so
people are
we
saying with claims like this. Do we have
yes.
do we know
So
where
we
the
know
tomb is? Do we have imprints of feet? Do we have we don't have anything. We have a book that says there were guards and that's it. That's not good enough evidence for
yeah.
us to say that this 100% happened. And so it's irrational to
So
believe
the
that it did.
problem is is that you're putting a lot of criticism or skepticism toward a work of antiquity that you probably wouldn't put toward any other work of antiquity. Because when you look
No,
at
I am
it,
100%. I
because
don't take the Odyssey or the Iliad as truth. I don't take King Arthur as truth because
yeah,
these things aren't verifiable. There are
yeah,
places in King
so I'm
Arthur
not
that are
talking
100% real, just like the Bible. But
yes. So we're not talking about geographical places. What we're talking about is personal testimony of people who were there at the scene. And we're talking about personal testimony of people. And
but
so I mean, I don't know
I've
what
already
so
showed you how personal
now the
testimony can
problem
be easily misused and how it's not
so
reliable on its own. You have to have
okay,
other
so
things supplementing it.
how can it be misused with the variables that we're given when we're talking about guards at the tomb, when we're talking about multiple personal testimony who were there, eyewitness accounts, multiple people who are willing to give their lives. You got to tell me how that's insufficient or how it's it
Because you
doesn't meet this
haven't
standard.
because you haven't showed me how this happened. You've just showed me there was a tomb, it was empty, and then you're saying that there were guards and all this happening, but I
I don't
don't
need
know
to show
that.
you
And
how it happened. You're making a
yeah,
logical
you do,
inference.
or else you don't have. No, you can't just make a logical inference. This is exactly the fallacy of what's at Sherlock, where he says when you've eliminated all possibilities, the only remaining one, however implausible, is the only possibility. Well, the problem is you can never. At least in a situation like this, you can never be sure that you're eliminating all possibilities. For instance, what if I don't know? What if there was like an earthquake and it cracked open and the body fell down and then it closed again and we would never know? I mean, I'm not saying
Yeah,
that that's what I think
but
happened. Obviously, I'm just saying until you can show me that there's a crazy situation and I can agree that some crazy stuff happened, but until you can show me
yes.
how this all happened and you can empirically prove to me, you can show me like something other than just it was full and then it wasn't.
Yeah, so
Especially when I know
again,
things that like
the
twins exist. And sorry, anyways.
yeah, so again, you keep throwing in. So when we're talking about twins, well, that's a non-verifiable thing that you're throwing in there. Nobody there. So if you're going to
Everything
say,
that you've said is
here's the
non-verifiable.
problem. Well, here's the problem. If you're going to try to say things like twins exist, well, then you would have to rely on the Bible in order to discredit the Bible, because the
Well,
only way that you would be
don't
able to find out that there were twins is that the Bible said that there was
so
that he had
don't get
twins.
caught up in the specifics. The specifics are there to show that there are natural explanations. No matter how improbable they are, there are still natural
So the twin had
explanations.
holes in his hands. So the twin
No,
had holes in his hands and in his feet.
you know what? First of all, don't get
No,
worried
no,
about the
no.
specifics.
Seriously,
Number
you know
two,
what I mean? Like
yeah, you totally
that's what I'm
could.
throwing
It's so
out there.
easy to
Like
make a hole.
because that's nonsensical.
Why?
I'm
Why is
sorry, a
that
hole
nonsense?
through your wrist.
Yes. Why is the idea
Because if
of
we actually
somebody putting a
understood,
hole through their wrist less nonsensical than a body disappeared and went into heaven, just
so
dematerialized and went into heaven? Why is nails through the
so
wrist more ridiculous than that? We have examples of
so
people who have
Jeff,
had nails through their wrists.
yeah. So Jeff, if anyone who's actually looked at the historical accounts or the medical procedures that when you look at what Roman soldiers did to their crucifixion victims, um, they were very, very good at killing people. So
Okay, so
we can know just by
we're
under. So this is what I mean. They were very, very good at killing people. We're not talking about I had a little dot in my wrist. We're talking about 13-inch nails that went all the way through. We're talking about holes that you could see through. I'm sorry, but if you're going to tell me that this, and I'm just throwing your analogy out there, and I'm only using it because you
no.
brought it out there, and I'm just showing
So
how nonsensical it is to even throw out something
we
like
don't
that.
need
Is that
we
if
don't
you're
need
going
to
to
go
try to
through
say
each.
that, yeah, okay.
Sorry, we don't need to go through each
Well,
analogy.
I'm
The
saying, hey,
analogy is
man, you
just there
brought it
to
up, man.
show. Okay, the analogy is just there to be an example of how there can be an explanation, any, that is
But
in the
yeah,
natural
they can
world.
be in, but is it good? Is it good? No, it's not a good explanation.
If it is in the
You know that's not
natural
a good
world,
explanation.
if it is in the natural world, it is an infinitely better explanation than something supernatural. When we have never seen an example of the supernatural, when you are unable to give me an example of the supernatural, when we're unable to define
Jeff,
what the supernatural
Jeff,
is, so far it just
but
seems
Jeff,
like the
just
supernatural
because
is
you're
things you
saying
can't explain.
no, what I'm saying is, so Jeff, just because you don't, okay, so again, when I'm talking about supernatural, we're talking about things that come that are transcendent, that are beyond the natural world, intervening
How can you
within
show
our
some
world.
things beyond the
And
natural
so
world?
and so what I'm postulating is that when you examine certain cases, that when you use proper reasoning, that the best explanation for that case is that the thing is supernatural. And the reason,
You
like
can't
for
say
example,
that
when
though. You're just going
so
straight to the end and saying the best explanation is supernatural.
no
You don't know that. You're just
no
claiming the
listen.
best explanation is supernatural.
So again, so what we're doing right now, when we're bringing in different variables, like for example, for the resurrection, if we're talking about multiple eyewitness testimony, and we're talking about the nature of the person who died. And so so the problem is that we know that Jesus actually died. We know that Romans are extremely good at killing people. We know verifiably that when they pierced through his side and the water came out, I forget the medical term for that, but he was verifiably dead. So if we're saying that he's verifiably dead, he's in the tomb, and then he's verifiably alive by over 500 eyewitness testimony, and a lot of these people were still alive when Paul was writing that. I'm sorry, that's nonsense just to say, oh well, there's some natural explanation to that. No, there's not, because we
No,
know
okay.
dead people don't get up.
So
We know dead people
again,
don't get up. If that's the case,
but again,
this is an account for an
you can't.
irregularity within our experience. And so
We
I
know
can
dead people
say,
don't get
because
up.
I know, yes, we know people who are dead, that they don't just miraculously get up from experiences like that.
Yeah.
And
So what
verifiably
I'm
they're
curious
around and
is,
talking with people. People can, yes, yeah, what's going on?
sorry, I'm just curious why, if we see a story and we see that there's somebody dead and the story says that they rose, we can either say the story is correct and this thing that has never happened, that we can never replicate, that nobody has been able to ever replicate, and the only people that have seen it are 500 unnamed people, which I guess a few of them are named because some of them were there, but 500 majorly over unnamed people from a book that was written 2,000 years ago. Either A, the story was just wrong or mistaken, or B, there are some crazy powers at play here that we have no way of seeing, no way of knowing, no way of verifying, no way of testing, but we're still going to believe that. So the examples I was using earlier, I don't actually think those are good explanations for the stories in the book, right? I'm just throwing out crazy shit that is still more plausible than the
Right,
supernatural, because I can demonstrate to you that for instance, the twins example, it's a ridiculous example. I don't think that Jesus had a twin. I would just say, did I cuss?
Yeah, you did. That's
Sorry.
why I did the buzz. That's why.
Oh, sorry. I didn't even realize.
It's all good, man. It's all good.
It's all good, bro.
But good conversation, man. That expires that time, man. But we're gonna go ahead and transition to closing statements, man. Yeah. So we got 5-minute closings. Michael, you got it first, man. 5-minute closing, man.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. I hope this was a lively debate for you guys. I hope you guys were able to learn something maybe that you didn't know. Jeff, I appreciate you for showing up, man, and offering your opinion and offering your perspective on the situation. Again, Marlon, I want to thank you for inviting me back on. Again, I'll go back over, very, very briefly some of my examples. I gave an example of, all the people that I gave an example of for the best explanation for their experience to be supernatural were Barbara Snyder, 1981 Chicago Tribune. You can look this up. She was medically diagnosed with multiple sclerosis to the point to where she physically couldn't eat, couldn't breathe on her own, had atrophy in her calves, hadn't been able to walk for 7 years. These are all medically testifiable. You can or medically accredited. Her doctors had written her off to be on her deathbed, and after her sisters were reading these prayers to her, she heard the voice of God tell her, "Get up, my child, and walk." It seems to me that the best explanation for that seems to be a supernatural explanation. When it talks about when we talk about I'm sorry, let me get her name again. When we talk about Candy Gunther Brown, who is a professor from Harvard, a very prestigious professor from Harvard, who went out to Mozambique, who is a I'm sorry, she has a PhD from Harvard, who is a professor at Indiana Brown. She went out to Mozambique and took some people with her that had a known track record for God using them. And they took a team of scientists and researchers, and they tested these people who had almost no sight, almost no hearing. They tested them, prayed for them in the name of Jesus, and afterwards they were able to hear, they were able to see, and they went off and did that same thing at another place. And this is testable. Again, this is from the let me get it again. This is from the study of therapeutic effect of proximal intercessory prayer. So that's something for you to be able to examine for your own self. We have Dwayne Miller. You can go to his website called nuvoice.org, where you can hear what he believes was a miracle that happened to him. Over 63 physicians told him that, or he had a virus in his throat. Over 63 physicians told him he wasn't going to be able to use his voice again. The Swiss Symposium told him that, hey, the prognosis for your voice is zero. You're not going to get your voice back. While reading Psalms 103, where God talks about healing all of our diseases, he got his voice back while preaching. You can hear it for yourself. So again, I try to give examples that there were medical documentations that these people had seriously deep ailments, and that either while praying to God, or either while experiencing something supernatural, either while reading God's word, that there was an effect and a physical effect that reflected differently with them. And so it seems to me that the best explanation for those cases are supernatural. We have the beginning of the universe. I think that if you lay down the proper philosophical and scientific framework, that you can actually see that the best explanation for the beginning of the universe is a theistic one, in which matches the Genesis account, if you actually know what the Genesis account actually describes. When you look at the testimony of the apostles that the apostles gave, and the over 500 eye testimony witnesses that were there that saw Jesus, who they knew were dead. The Romans were very good at killing people. He was verifiably dead when they pierced his side and his heart erupted. And you were able to see that he was verifiably dead. They didn't even know what that medical term was at that time. Put him in a tomb, which was guarded by soldiers. And 3 days later, he rose. And the apostles were able to touch him or talk to him. They spent 40 days with him. And so, and these are multiple eyewitness accounts, not just one person. And so, to just scrap that out, or just good evidence doesn't become bad evidence with age. And so we can just look at that and say, obviously more, you have to go into more detail on that, but you can look at these examples, you can lay them out. And I think with the proper framework and the proper contextual understanding, it seems to me that the proper understanding or the best explanation for these situations are supernatural.
All right. Thank you, Michael. All right. Let's see. All right, Jeff, you got it for 5 minutes, man. Hey, Jeff, I think you muted.
Thank you. All right, cool. So, there's a lot of pretty extraordinary claims that are made here, but unfortunately, I'm just not able to go independently verify any of these. However, it seems to me that whenever I hear a lot of stories like this, it usually comes out that there's a lot of extra information that was either omitted on purpose, not by my buddy here, but by people who are telling these stories, or it's just people that are misunderstanding a situation. They tend to be very religious, so they attribute it to religious things, like they'll say we prayed and then we were healed. That doesn't take into account a lot of other things, like I assume if they're religious, they're probably praying a lot. There are basically a lot of very reasonable ways to explain all of this stuff. And even if it is unexplained, to jump to a conclusion like the supernatural is a fallacy within itself, or is illogical, because we don't have any examples of the supernatural. We just have examples of events where something happened something allegedly happened that we don't know how it happened. And that's all we know about it at that point. We can't say that there's supernatural reasoning behind it if there's no good evidence, which again, evidence would be data plus assessment. If we're going to have good evidence for anything, it has to be repeatable, independently verifiable, strongly tied to specific discrete hypothesis, and it should be falsifiable. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence in both quantity and quality. I don't consider a book saying that, or I mean, I call it a book, but the Bible saying that a bunch of people claim they saw something, to me, that is not extraordinary evidence, especially if we have no other examples of any of this happening anywhere ever. Then we also have to talk about, if we're talking about intercessory prayer being useful, we can also say that there are other people of other religions or non-religions who also appeal to different deities or different things, and then they have stories of people that got healed by them. So I'm curious as to just basically how all this works. Because I mean, I want to heal people, and if there's a supernatural event here that we can show heals people, then I want to know how to get that event to happen. And if that event is by converting to Christianity and praying to God, that's totally cool. Also in these stories, when you hear stories of people that pray and then get healed, the stories you don't hear are all the people that are praying to be healed and then don't get healed. So we're kind of selectively, we're selectively choosing which stories we want to heal or to hear, because with stories like these people that get healed, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of other stories of people that had cancer or had other issues, prayed to God and didn't get healed and unfortunately died. So what I want to know is, how can we show that there's something supernatural happening here other than just saying there are two things? There was a beginning state and an end state. And with my knowledge of the world, I cannot explain how we got from beginning state to end state. Just because you do not have an explanation does not mean that the most logical explanation is the supernatural, especially, like I said, if we don't have any examples of the supernatural to appeal to. We have plenty of examples of people supposedly miraculously being cured. We have plenty of examples of doctors misdiagnosing things. We have plenty of reasonable examples for all these things that would make a lot more sense, especially when compounding on each other and building up on each other, than just appealing to a supernatural that we can't explain how it works. We can't explain what it is. We can't explain how to get it to do anything. It's basically, without any of that evidence, then I would consider that irrational. I also would just really like to see any of the medical documents for any of these events, because I would be very surprised to find out that the doctors, the people who are knowledgeable and are experts and interacted with and studied these people, came to the same conclusion that there was a supernatural event that happened. Yeah, it just seems to me that there's a lot of like post hoc rationalization for things, a lot of like selectively editing and like choosing which stories to happen, not by you necessarily, but just by the nature of how these stories pass. People, like I said before, people will tell the story of how they prayed and got healed. People don't tend to tell the story of when they prayed and didn't get healed, because that happens all the time. So yeah, unless we have something that's repeatable, independently verifiable, strongly tied to a specific hypothesis and falsifiable, then there's usually not good reason to believe it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't really, just because something went from A to B and I can't explain by natural laws, my understanding of natural laws, how that happened, doesn't mean that you can just say it's the supernatural. It just means that we don't know and we should look for a reason. And that's it.
All right, thank you both. All right, so now we're going to transition to our Q&A portion of this debate. And so let's get to these questions, guys.
I need to take like a 30-second break, but I'll be right back.
All right, while you're doing that, I'll go over some announcements. All right, guys, so coming up on October 17th, which is tomorrow, there's a correction in the time, I'm sorry. It'd actually be 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that's going to be against Matt Saley. And his opponent name is very difficult to pronounce. And I'm terrible with names, so I don't want to pronounce it and destroy it. But the topic is Christianity a religion of bloody oppression? All right, that's coming up at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that's 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. After that, I have a 2-on-2 debate. Is regeneration needed before one can come to Christ? That's coming up October 23rd at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Then after that, I have Sam Shimon and Matt Slick. All right, so this is going to be a huge debate. This is going to be very, very, very highly anticipated one. So everybody knows Sam Shimon, very popular when it comes to debating Muslims. I think he's been doing this since for 1999. And Matt Slick, 30, 40 years doing what he do, especially in the realm of studying Calvinism and Reformed theology. He's been doing it for 30, 40 years. So these guys have experience of what's going on. The topic is limited atonement biblical. So this is going to be a great one. It's coming out October 24th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then after that, I have George Alvarado versus Matt Singleton. Was Jesus eternally or incarnationally the Son of God? So that's coming up October 26th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. All right. So that's it. Back to the questions, man. Welcome back, Mr. Jeff.
Thank you.
All right. So let's jump into these questions real quick. First one's for you, Jeff. These are heavy, Jeff. Mm-hmm. My audience is mostly Christians, Jeff, so get ready for it.
Hey, understandable.
Jeff, hey man,
put me through the ringer.
Hey man, welcome to the den of sheep, man.
I will happily be the lion in the den of sheep.
All right, we'll find that out. We'll find out. Let's see what we got. See if he comes. Hold on. Going on.
Hey Jeff, man, I want to appreciate you, bro, man. You did an awesome job, bro.
Yeah, no, it was fun talking to you. Sorry if I come from most of the debates that I normally do in other formats are usually a lot more confrontational. So I apologize if I let any of that through. I was trying to be
you're good, bro.
Trying to be as
you're good, man.
down as possible. All right.
All right. So the first question for you,
you're all
Jeff,
good, bro.
It says paranormal investigations display repeatable evidence of EVP. I'm not sure what EVPS.
These are all like terms to do with like ghosts and poltergeists and stuff. Okay. Sorry, I can let you read it out. I'm sorry. I just
is it for like paranormal experience?
Yeah.
I guess video apparitions, like scratches, that. Foul smell. That's 4 out of 5 senses. It's light of method. I can't read today, man. Methodical neutrality. What's counter evidence? Hey, Salat. Hey, Sahi, you better start talking regular talk up in here, man.
I feel you.
What's wrong with you, Sahi?
So when talking about this paranormal stuff, again, it's extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, both in quality and quantity. What we're talking about here is we see repeatable evidence of EVPs. We see stuff we don't know what it is. Things like video apparitions, most of the time, can easily be explained by like just things that happen within cameras, like lens flares, stuff like that. Foul smells and scratches. I don't know. Haunted places tend to not have good locks, from what I can tell. So animals probably get in. None of these are actually like empirically verifiable. Like each one individually you might say could point towards a certain solution, like being ghosts or whatnot. But until you can actually like bring all the evidence together, there are so many other like natural, reasonable explanations for any of these that there's no reason to jump to the conclusion that like it's paranormal or ghosts.
All right, what are your thoughts on that, Mr. Michael?
Well, I want to touch on a phrase that keeps getting used, and that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. That's an extraordinary claim itself, and so it doesn't even meet its own standard. And so I think that we should be careful not to keep using that because again,
I don't know how that's
So the problem is that extraordinary claims require sufficient evidence. It's not that it requires extraordinary evidence, because the problem is going to be what's extraordinary to you may not be extraordinary to me. It's going to be really subjective. So it needs to boil down to. Yeah, what's up, man?
Sorry, I think there's like a delay. This is more of like a semantics argument than anything. I'll just tell you right there, because what I would say is the sufficient evidence for an extraordinary claim would be extraordinary evidence. So we're basically just interchanging the word sufficient with extraordinary right here. It's just basically to say when you make a claim for something that we don't see that's extraordinary, like Jesus disappeared from the tomb and ascended to heaven, then I would say just people seeing it wouldn't be good enough evidence. Whereas if somebody was like, Shamu jumped out of the water, then enough than just 100 people telling me they saw it would be good enough evidence for me to at least tentatively accept it as true, because I know all of these things can happen.
Yeah. So what I mean, I think you actually gave the right answer to this before, is that, claims really require, evidence that is sufficient in terms of the proportionality of the claim. Like, for example, if I say I have an invisible friend, right? If I say I have an invisible friend, and you say, well, take a picture of him. Okay, well, the type of evidence that you're looking doesn't meet the claim that I'm making. And so the problem is that you need evidence that's going to be sufficient or proportionate to the claim that I'm making, right? And so you need the proper methodological approach to the claim that I'm making. So if I'm making, you understand what I'm saying? And so, like, for something like
Yeah.
this, man, when it talks about paranormal, investigate, oh Lord Jesus, repeatable evidence, scratches, yeah, look, I think honestly, I'm going to side with Jeff on this one. Honestly, I think a lot of times, I think sometimes, like for example, there are experiences that I've had that I believe are supernatural, right? But I know could easily be discounted as like a psychological phenomenon. So I don't even try to bring it up, but I have a belief that I'm like, hey, it seems to me that this is a supernatural thing. But it may be like I can understand somebody else scratching it off as psychological. So I try not to bring stuff like this up. I'm not to say that there's no truth to it. I do believe that a lot of times people who experience those things believe what they experience. I personally wouldn't know the right criteria in order to you know you know test something like that. I haven't really looked too deep into some of these, but the ones I have looked into, I'm like, I don't know if I really, there's always that extra little thing that kind of leaves you thinking like, I don't know if that is what they think it is. So, Jeff, I'm kind of siding with you on this one. I'm not leaving them all out. I do think that it is, probable that people experience stuff like this. I've had to engage in the ministry of deliverance myself, so I do believe, in what's called, exorcisms and stuff like that. Um, but a lot of different stuff that people claim is like paranormal and stuff like that. I don't, I don't know. That's kind of a difficult one. So,
All right. Next question for you, Michael.
mhm.
Questions ain't coming up, man. What's going on? Let me see what's going on with this. Like the questions are coming up. Fix that real quick. Oh, there it is. I don't know. It's like popping up late. So anyway, the question for Michael: what do you think about the fact that many separated cultures around the world throughout history have reported experiencing these things? Supernatural.
Yeah.
Claims.
So this kind of goes like to Jeff's. I think you use it as an objection about basically like what about miracles from other religions and stuff like that, right, Jeff? You were saying like, hey, like people from other religions make these claims and things like that. Or you're going to falsify theirs. No, not necessarily. I do believe that the way I understand things, demons can do certain works. I do believe that people can. I think a lot of times even people that are Christians that make certain claims, I don't necessarily just believe their claims. I try to look into I try to look into the variables. I try to see, what's the best explanation for that. And a lot of times, I can side with you, Jeff, and say I don't think that was a supernatural encounter. I think that was just more of a psychological phenomenon that they were experiencing. But I think you have to take all of these cases, case by case. And so, a lot of times what you'll read like in ancient literature, you can clearly tell something is like mythological rather than like rather than it meaning to be a historical count or a historical count to reflect reality. And when you look at the Old Testament, when you look at the New Testament, these are clearly historical accounts that are meant to reflect as an actual thing that happened in history, uh, to reflect reality. So I do think that there are other religions that have certain experiences, and some of them may be psychological. My personal view is that some of it may be demons at work. You know,
All right. What are your
like with
thoughts on this,
aliens.
Jeff?
Again, I don't know if you're going to make claims for these are the things that are doing it. I think the burden of proof is on the person to bring evidence for why that's happening. It seems to me that usually people are just like misinformed, don't really have an understanding. And also the Bible, I don't know, there's so many things in the Bible that just seem like extraordinary claims that don't really have any other evidence other than the Bible says so in both the New and Old Testament, that I don't really see how anybody could use it as like a verifiable source of like historical truth. Like for instance, I don't think there's even any evidence that like the Jews were mass enslaved in Egypt at any point. We have like walls being busted. It doesn't matter what it is. The long story short is the point of saying that other people have is basically saying that if you have different people saying that there's different things and claiming that if you have a lot of people experiencing a similar phenomenon but claiming there are different starters or different catalysts for these phenomenon, the best thing we can do is just kind of compare and see what are the similarities that we have between these. And if we see that two different people from two different religions are claiming their God did two different things, then the similarities there aren't that they each have a God that can do something. It's that they had something similar happen to them that they couldn't explain, so they appealed to the best explanation for the unknowable that they have, which is religion, which is something humans have done for all throughout history. So it's basically just like a God at the gaps.
Okay. All right. Another question coming at you. If it wants to come up, please get this thing up. They pop it up late. All right. Hey, misbehaving right now. Anyway, Michael, as a historical person, Paul performed miracles, which were acknowledged by his enemies. Why did the Pharisee of the Pharisees give up his Jewish legacy to die for Christ?
Yeah, it seems to me that the best explanation is the explanation that Paul himself gave, is that Christ rose, that he believes that, that Jesus was the Messiah, that he believes that Jesus was God. And he was an eyewitness testimony to the risen Savior. So it seems to me that, somebody like Paul, who literally gave away all of his wealth, he gave away all of his social status, and who was seeking to destroy the church. It seems like to me, given Paul's historical account of things, that the explanation that he gave makes sense for the best explanation for his radical transformation, other than some other weird, explanation. I don't see a better explanation that's more fitting for the historical account that Paul gives us. So,
all right, Jeff, what are your thoughts on that, man?
Yeah, I'm just kind of reiterate things I've said. People often have very strong beliefs that they don't really have a sound reason to believe in, that they're willing to die for. And usually you can even tell people that have really strong beliefs will obviously attribute things in their lives to their belief system. This happens to everyone. It's not just like religious people. It's everyone for whatever that they like believe in, right? It's like the sports fan that wears a certain jersey because he wants his sports team to do better, right? There's no actual tie there, but there's the person, might have a somewhat belief. And again, I'm not trying to like trivialize the belief that Paul had. I realize that these are like two separate things. But yeah, it seems to me a better explanation is just that he was mistaken, especially since we don't have any examples of this happening like outside of these stories.
All right. Got here. All right, this question's for you, Jeff. How do you explain for those who claimed out-of-body experiences in which they described in great detail places, things they'd never seen or been to before, and this was verified?
You're going to have to give me some examples because I've heard plenty of instances of out-of-body experiences that either... So the brain does crazy stuff, and usually this is happening when people are... I'm assuming that you're talking about near-death experiences. I could be wrong. But especially when you're getting to a near-death experience, your brain releases a whole bunch of crazy chemicals, which makes your brain go crazy, which is going to make it hallucinate, and a bunch of stuff's going to happen. Now, with things they've never seen or been to before, and this was verified, you're going to have to show me where it was verified. I've heard stories of people saying, like, describing places far off that they said they had never been to, blah, blah, blah. Well, then it turns out they went and looked through, like, their search history, and it turns out they had seen it somewhere on the internet before, so they're kind of just explaining things that happen. It's kind of like how you can be in a dream and you can recognize somebody in your dream that might have been a person that you forgot about, that you walked by the other day, but your brain still holds this information. Again, I don't really know. I would say that it's not up to me to describe why they can't do it. It would be up to you to show me how they can, and then it would be up to you to like demonstrate it, to give me falsifiables, to reproduce it, to have other people reproduce it. Until we get to that point, you can't say that this is like God. We can say, I honestly don't know why I give time trying to say how it wasn't supernatural, because again, it's not up to me. It's up to the person claiming it is supernatural to show that it is. Otherwise, there are always usually good explanations for it.
All right, Michael, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, again, I think we need to be careful of our methodological approach to the claim, right? Because if we're talking about someone like God, who he in and of himself is choosing to intervene or cause the thing to come about, us humans trying to reenact or trying to recreate a situation seems nonsensical. Because if the event happening is determined by God himself causing it to come into play, for us to keep trying to recreate it seems just silly to me. And so we have to be, so when we're talking about some of these claims, again, we have to take them case by case, and we have to understand the proper methodological approach to understand the claim. So like when it comes to so Gary Habermas actually wrote a really good book about this, about out of body experiences and near death experiences. And what you'll find, and this is why I find this really difficult for an atheistic, materialistic, or a worldview to explain. I don't know what your understanding is of whether or not humans have souls or not. But especially if you believe that we don't have souls, it's really difficult for an atheist or someone who does not believe in the supernatural or the existence of the soul. It's really difficult for me to understand how somebody can have a proper explanation for an out of body experience where a person is on a medical bed and they have an out of body experience where they're over their bed and there's this very long 9 or 10 digit number that's written on the medical equipment that they've never seen before. And the person just so happens to have OCD and was able to actually, while they were having an out of body experience, remember that number. And when they came back to, they quoted that number off, and then they were wondering. They said, "Hey, is that the number on top of this medical device?" And when they told the doctor about it, the doctor said, "How in the world did you know that number?" And they explained to them how they knew that number. Or like another individual who was, while being operated on, saw the babysitter at their house doing a particular thing with their kids or whatever. It wasn't anything bad. It just saw like a particular series of events happening at their house. And when they came back to, they called and said, "Hey, were you guys doing X, Y, Z or whatever?" And the babysitter confirmed and said, "Yeah, we were doing these things." And so now I do think that like a lot of times, I'm with you, Jeff, where you may see a person or and you may see a person subliminally and you didn't recognize that you saw that person. You didn't make cognition that you saw that person, and maybe you see him in a dream or whatever, or like your brain recognizes that face. And a lot of times I've even heard that we have dreams, and a lot of times the faces are blank because we haven't seen that face yet, or something like that. I forget how the theory goes. It's when you look at the dreams, but so some of that I can be with you, but some of that actually doesn't even make sense on an atheistic worldview where especially where you don't have a soul and everything is just material. So I don't understand the explanation for that from an atheistic worldview. It seems like the Christian worldview actually gives a better explanation or foundation for that to even make sense in. So
All right, there's questions for you, Jeff. Isn't there more evidence for Jesus because of the number of copies of the Bible we have throughout history than for many other historical figures? How do you choose which are of no importance?
No, copies of the Bible actually is even worse, because all these different copies of the Bible have been translated in a whole bunch of different ways. When you're translating books, there's a lot of editorializing from the translators, whether or not they mean to do it or not. Like, for instance, one word in Hebrew might not directly translate to another word in Latin, which might not directly translate to another word in English. So by the time it gets to English, it's been translated a couple times. There's a lot lost in there. And it doesn't really matter how old it is or how many copies of it there are. That none of that really matters. what's important is, again, like the evidence. Like if we know certain things about like Roman history because we have firsthand records from that time, we can go back and we can do digs and we can see, if we like look at certain things, we might be able to say, well, then we expect this to be found here. And then if we find that there, that means we probably had a pretty good idea of what was happening. And when I say things are like repeatable, I don't mean like repeat the exact same situation. But number one, if you can't repeat it, then it's not really useful to us because we can't do anything with it. And number two, if you can't repeat it, then there's no way to show anybody else other than the people that you were with that it happened. Therefore, we're kind of just taking it on faith. And the whole point of this is that faith is not a good, reliable path to truth, because you can believe anything on faith. It doesn't have to be true or not. So I want to find the most empirically true, the most empirically verifiable and consistent way to get to truth, which seems to be using those standards of evidence, using the scientific method, which when applied to things like supernatural claims of healing, don't hold up. So until we get to that point, we just got to say, I don't know.
Mr. Michael, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Jeff, what was your statement about faith?
I was basically just saying that, like, when I used it there, what I was saying, if two people tell you that something happened that seems extraordinary and that has no explanation except for supernatural, and you weren't there to experience with them, and they're not able to replicate it, then you're just kind of taking them on faith that it's true if you believe them. Otherwise, you can either just assume that they're mistaken, you can guess that they're lying. There's probably a better explanation. And I can't just take that people saying they saw something as like verifiable truth, especially for huge claims like this.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so yeah, let's address that with the question, because if I understand the question correctly, I just want to make sure I'm understanding it. She said, isn't there more evidence for Jesus because of the number of copies of Bibles we have throughout history than the many other historical figures? So I think I understand what this person's asking, but I think, maybe they probably should have phrased it wrong, because one, what it seems to me to attest to Jesus about, whether or not he actually historically existed, is that the accounts of the events of Jesus's life were actually written in a very short time after the events, and they were written very close to the events that they were recording about. And it's not just one. Gary Habermas talks about this, is that within the ancient world, in order for something to be reliable, to have two copies was a good weigher out of whether or not it was reliable or not. Well, the thing is that we have multiple eyewitness accounts of the events of Jesus's life, and so when we have multiple eyewitnesses of the events of his life that are very close to so it's not just that we had people that said stuff, and that's, I think, where we got to be careful. It's not that we just have people that said stuff. We have eyewitness people that were there, that are verifiably there, and we have eyewitness testimony of people who were willing to die for it. We're not talking about people 100 years later. We're talking about people who were there on the scene, who saw Jesus, who heard Jesus, touched Jesus, walked with him, ate with him, knew what he looked like, and who had no good reason to lie about this. They gained nothing. They didn't gain finances. They didn't gain wealth, or they didn't gain fame during their time. At least during their time, we only know about them because of their martyrdom. Because they gave their lives for it. And so it seems to me that the sincerity of their testimony is known by their willingness to die, and it's actually even recorded in outside sources. And so when, I think it's really the fact that the events were recorded very close to, that the events were documented very close to to when it happened. And when you see the people, they gained nothing for it. They lost everything for it. So I don't understand how we can just dismiss that. It's not just people saying a thing.
I mean, I can show you the reason I can not dismiss it, but I can say that that's not really strong evidence, is I can show you other people that are doing the same exact stuff for other things that we would both agree probably aren't true or don't have a good foundation.
We're talking about 100 years later, or we talking about eyewitness testimony?
It does.
That's not only recorded by themselves, but recorded by outside sources. That's verified by
Yeah, I
eyewitness.
mean, again, like eyewitness testimony. First of all, the Bible says that a bunch of people saw it. There are because some of the Gospels are written by actual people that were like allegedly with Jesus, but the Bible says that there were a lot of firsthand accounts, but we don't actually have it. And again, we can't replicate anything that was done there. There's no actual physical evidence of any of this happening. There's no sources other than the Bible that make these claims that were
I'm sorry.
happening.
Wait, whoa. You said there's no physical evidence of what?
Of any supernatural claim from the Bible.
Okay, like what? You got to give me an example, because that's just an assertion, man.
The Red Sea parting, the water into wine, lepers being cured at the touch.
Stop right there. There is a whole documentary that you can watch that actually goes through the geographical location of the. So what you'll actually find is Scripture talks about how Moses struck a rock and how water came from it. Sounds nutty, doesn't it? Well, not if you have the right geographical location, where there's a huge rock that is 4 stories high, that is split evenly down the middle and has water erosion from it. And it's in the exact location that we find biblically that is attested to it. At the bottom of it, what we find are feet that are carved out and sandal that are carved out that look like sandal markings. And the reason why they're there, the Bible talks about how God told them to mark every place where they had been, for it would be their land, because they resonated there. As a matter of fact, if you look at the bottom of that sea, now I'm not sure if it's still there because it was extremely old, but there's a whole documentary on this. Is that what you'll find is that at the bottom of that sea, that there are still wheels right now that match the description of ancient Egyptian wheels from the or the spokes and wheels from their chariots, and there are horse skulls down there and everything, and even some of the armor from down there. So I mean, to say that there's no evidence, or to say is one thing. To say, well, I'm not sure what the evidence really shows, is another. So there's evidence. You just have to be able to evaluate it properly, and let the evidence lead you to your own conclusion.
So there's technically evidence for anything, especially when you start talking about you can justify anything philosophically or whatnot. The issue is, number one, being a layman, I kind of not having the experience that experts have. You kind of, in situations like this, need to resort to expert consensus. And it seems like all the people that study this aren't coming to these conclusions. So therefore, I have one story from some source that may or may not, be telling everything correctly. And then I have the entire historical consensus and bodies of work of all the experts. I'd like to hear about it. I'm just confused why the people that.
That's all right, bro. I'll send them to you when I get done. It's cool. I mean, you just examine it and just look at it, and just follow the evidence where it leads.
And I'm sorry to cut this off, but I really got to go. I got to head out. But this was fun.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff. I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's all good, man. We actually we did get through. We did get, the same person kept asking a bunch of questions, so we did get questions from all those who did ask questions. So we actually had a good point to conclude this anyway, Jeff, man. So
I'm sorry, Jeff, man. I'm sorry you got to go, bro.
Yeah, no, I am too.
It's all good, man.
I know it's probably late for y'all too, but I gotta go. I can't, unfortunately. Yeah. Anyways, this was fun. Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry to kind of randomly just hop out on y'all, but
it's all good. Last thing, I'll be sending out gifts to both of you. So I'll be contacting both of you to send a gift out to you for coming on the show. All right. You guys have a good
$100 million.
I'm looking forward to it.
That'd be nice, man. All right, y'all be good, and I'll be in contact with you. God bless.
All right. Have a good one.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Yeah, me too.
All right, folks. Great debate, man. Very, very, very interesting conversation. And I hope you guys got a lot out of it. So, when it comes to evidence for the supernatural, and this is probably why, and personally to me, this is one of the hardest areas to sort of prove or to show as true. Because, everything we deal with for the most part is physical. And the atheists, when they come and approach things, they approach things from a naturalistic, materialistic perspective. And so the evidence that we have is probably not going to convince them, and that's typical when we deal with debates, right? Because debates are usually the interlocutors are not convinced once they leave the debates. But we do pray for Jeff. We do hope that Jeff allows the evidence to speak for itself, and so that he doesn't interject his thoughts and his opinions into the evidence and let the evidence speak for itself. That's important. That's the thing we should be doing as believers. We should be praying for Jeff, praying for the atheists out there, those out there who are suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, right? So we need to be praying for them and praying that God will open their heart to believe. It's not the evidence that's going to make somebody believe. It is God working in their heart that's going to change their heart to make them believe, right? So it's important that we understand that, so we don't beat ourselves up and present evidence, you know, and throwing ourselves all over the place, knowing that it's God who changes the heart. So let's make sure we remember that and keep that in mind as we interlock with the atheist, or we interlock with the Muslim, you know, all these guys who are contrary to what we believe. All right. That said, I already went over the announcements again, so just be on the lookout. I got a debate tomorrow coming up. It's at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure that you are on the look. It's going to be about is Christianity a religion of bloody oppression? So that's going to be interesting. It'll be a Black Hebrew Israelite and a Christian. So it's going to be a good debate. So hopefully it turns out well. So if you can, join me on that one, and be on the lookout for that, for a bunch of debates. Also, you know, like I told you, I have Sam Shimon and Matt Slick coming up, but also have Pastor Doug Wilson and Dr. Kurt Jaros. They're going to be debating as well. That's coming up the 27th of this month. So be on the lookout for that. That's going to be a huge debate. So make sure that you are on the lookout for that. That said, I just want to also encourage you to go ahead and continue. Just subscribe before you leave this channel. Subscribe. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you hit that notification bell. Make sure you hit it so that you'll stay in the loop with the gospel truth has going on. And lastly, all this content is on podcast. I have it on Google Play, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify. So make sure that you are subscribing on the iTunes or Google, the podcast as well, for all this content. All right. That said, I want to thank you for joining me here on the Gospel Truth. It's always a pleasure to be able to bring debates to you. It's always a pleasure to bring Bible studies to you. And I'm going to look forward to the next one. All right. That said, I'm gone. May God bless you and may God keep you. Gone.